Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another live stream. And today we are blessed to have John Biebel with us from January Scent Project. John, thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm all right. How are you, Ramsey?
Good. It's a pleasure to have you on the channel. So I must admit, before you very kindly reached out and sent me your sample set, which I truly enjoyed getting to know your work, I pretty much knew nothing about you or your work. So for maybe our viewers who are kind of in the same boat, can you tell us a little bit about the brand and how January Scent Project came to be? Uh-oh, you're muted.
Sorry there.
There you go.
All right, good. I had a slight echo issue there. Can you hear me now? Good.
I can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, so for me, it started out of intense curiosity about the brand. Actually, I just got to up again. I'm having big echo issue with my mic for some reason. 1 second. Yeah, hold on.
Is anyone else getting an echo? I'm not getting it on my end.
Just check. Sorry about that.
No.
Okay. Hang on.
How about now? I can hear you. Yeah, the chat says they're not getting an echo either.
Okay.
Thank you, Paolo.
Cool. Hi, Paolo. All right.
So yeah, tell us how did it become, where did the name come from? Where did January Scent Project come from?
Sure. So I apologize. I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Just 1 second. Okay. I think I'm all set now. Sorry about that.
Is that better? Test 1, 2, 3.
There we go.
All right, we'll consider that the backstage.
Okay. There we go. So, yeah, it started out of a lot of curiosity about how fragrances are made when I started working for Fragrantica, my writing. And sorry, 1 quick second here.
Now they say there is an echo. Okay, how about this? Let's switch gears. Let me get off of the laptop I'm on. I'll jump on my phone. How about that? Stay here. I'll be back. You entertain the chat. Let's see if that helps.
All right. Okay. Hey, folks. Sorry, this appears to be partially my fault. My apologies. But we will be back momentarily, I'm sure. Hey, everyone. Welcome. I'm joining you from Rhode Island. And I'm 1 hour ahead of Ramsey. We will be with you shortly. And sorry for the problem here. Now there is an echo. Okay. Paulo, you're still okay. Let's see now.
Okay, let's see if we can get John on now.
Hey there.
All right, how about round 2?
I think this is better.
Is this better?
I believe so. I'm still, I apologize. I'm going to move to another mic. Just give me 1 second. I think it'll help.
Okay, deal. What are you guys wearing today? What's everyone wearing in the chat? I am in Witness by Jacques Bogart. It's actually the first time I've worn this in 2 years. It's one of the downsides of having a big collection. Sometimes stuff just kind of gets kicked to the back burner. It's kicked to the back burner.
Okay. I'm going to probably need to put my headphones in, so I'll be right just back in 1 second.
Deal.
Okay, thanks, man. I'm going to probably need to put my headphones in, so I'll be right just back in 1 second.
Deal. Yo, DJ, what's happening? I'm excited for the interview as well. We got to get the technical issues down. Love it when the tech issues pop up, especially on a big interview like this. I had 3 people on the stream last time. It was Rich and Jonathan, and I don't think we had any issues. And of course, whenever it's an important stream, bam, the tech issues pop up. Dushan, thanks for being here. Gerard, GMG, welcome. Welcome from Italy, my friend. Yo, Nikki. Echo now. Echo's back. Technology issues. You gotta love it. We're back.
Hey, Ramsey, I'm wondering if I could just join you from the live stream and you could pull me in that way. Would that be easier?
Yeah, I think so. That link that I sent you, I think, can be clicked on pretty much any platform. You can use your phone or anything.
Okay, I'm going to just join the chat and then I'll see you. Maybe you can pull me in that.
I can hear you and see you fine actually now. I don't think there's an echo.
I'm speaking and then there's like a 10-second delay and then I'm hearing all of this stuff come back to me.
Okay.
So it's making it really hard for me to process what I'm hearing. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Be right back. I'll see you in chat. 1 second.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
We'll get this. We'll figure this out. Don't worry. We've got John Biebel in the house. It has to work. You guys get your questions ready? Get your questions ready for John. Once we figure out the tech issues, he's going to be pumped. We'll have to save that one. I'm going to jot that down. Actually, I think I can star these. Yes, star the comment. Look at me using technology.
I think I figured it out.
Okay, round 2. What do you think?
We are absolutely good to go now. My major apologies, and I think you can go back to your regular. If you want, you can go back to your computer if you prefer.
No way! I'm terrified now.
No, it's totally my fault. I will tell you why the stupidness of why this happened before, and people will laugh at me later. But
you had a YouTube open?
I totally did, and I'm
that'll do it. That's okay. It's good stuff. No, it's good to see you. I'll stay on the phone.
Awesome.
You guys will just have to zoom in. I'll be mini, but you are pretty low. Let me see if I can increase your mic settings. No, they're all the way up.
All right, I can fix that as well too, man. Hold on 1 second. Settings, mic volume, audio. Okay, is this? I'll just get a little closer. Is this a little better?
Yes, that's perfect.
All right.
All right, let's do take 3. Let's see. I had some questions ready. The first question was I wanted to learn a little bit about January Scent Project because until you basically reached out and sent me your sample set, which I think is extremely fairly priced. What is this, like $40 or something?
Yeah, $40.
I didn't know anything about you or the brand. So for those out there that maybe are still kind of in the boat I was in a few months about your brand, tell us a little bit about January Scent Project and how the name came about and the brand itself.
Sure thing. Is the audio a little better? Good. All right, perfect. So I started making perfume basically because I first started writing for Fragrantica. I still write for Fragrantica, and I was only maybe about a year into doing so back. Oh gosh, I can't remember when I started now, but it's a while ago now, and I became unbelievably curious about how perfumes were made. and the technical aspects behind it. And it started off first by just wanting to understand what did some of these things smell like, right? And you read about them, but you don't actually know what they smell like as isolated things. So I started buying a few things, and before I knew it, I thought, oh, gee, well, if you put two together, what do those smell like? And, my biggest ambition was just to make a fragrance, one thing that didn't suck, right? That actually wouldn't be embarrassing to wear on skin. And that's all I ever aspired to do, right? So, and we'll see, maybe I'll get there someday, but okay. But seriously, I mean, I see it as this. There's so much to learn in perfume that you could go on for ages. It's just there's so much to learn. But the curiosity is a really big motivator, and so I just kept learning, buying more things, reading, talking to people, and I was very fortunate that by writing so much, I got to interview people. I interviewed perfumers, and there were a few key perfumers I met that were really important for me. I took a trip to Amsterdam and I met the perfumer for Orto Parisi and Nasamoto, and had this.
Awesome.
Oh, he's incredible, and he's this larger than life figure, and he doesn't actually like to talk to interviewers. So he kind of gave me a hard time, which is a bit of a test he does with people to see, like, in case you walk out on him or something, but
right.
Gautier's is just, he's a wild guy, but he really told me some amazing stories. And I remember looking and thinking, I could see a life like this. Like, I can see this sort of creative mind and how he works and how he doesn't take himself too seriously. Like, he actually has a big sense of humor, and there was something very admirable about that. And there was another perfumer I met named Spiros Strasopoulos, and he has a brand called Baruti, and he's also great guy, and totally different spectrum, opposite ends of the spectrum. One completely outlandish, crazy guy, one very studied, much more academic, a little more serious, still approachable guy. But I thought, wow, I met these two interesting people who are from different backgrounds, and one's Dutch and Greek and one is Italian, and they have, really different approaches to perfume, but they all make stuff that I really like. And it was very formidable part of, formidable people. And it affected me a lot. And I thought, yeah, this is something I can keep doing. So I started, doing it more seriously. The name is kind of interesting. I had been saving this up in my head for a while. So when I was in high school, I took a graphic design class, and one of the projects we had to do was to make a calendar. There were 12 of us in the class, and we each picked a month. And I remember very specifically, my teacher said, January is a really tough month. It's the first one in the calendar, so it's got to be important and good. You can't screw it up. But it's really boring. I mean, it's one of the most boring months in the year, So it carries a lot of weight, and you've got to do something really good with it, because otherwise it's just kind of, people just pass by it. And I always stuck that in my head as like, oh, I got to file that away. That's a really interesting idea, for something. So there seemed like a lot of possibility within the notion of the idea of January and the beginning of something. So when I started doing this, my brain tucked that out again. So, oh yeah, don't forget, you had this great idea. So
that's a very personal story. No, I appreciate you sharing. That makes perfect sense now that you mention it. Now that you mentioned January being the first month and the meaning of of the story, it makes a lot of sense from the name. No, I very much appreciate you sharing that. So, were you a fragrance lover before you started writing for Fragrantica, or was the act of writing for Fragrantica like part of you kind of falling in love with perfume?
It kind of happened in a funny way. So when I was young, I remember, I really liked fragrances. My mom wore them a lot. My dad wore them a lot. In fact, I wrote a funny article kind of remembering my father, and, he tended to really wear way too much aftershave, cologne and stuff.
He was an oversprayer.
Completely. And he loved, like, sort of bottles where you'd sort of like, jigger it out, and he'd like slap it all over himself. And, I just was really funny. I loved that whole ritual of it too. And yeah, he completely was. And, I sort of let my interest in it it faded for a long time. And then I I don't know quite how this happened, but I got the sample pack from Histoire de Parfum in France, and it was it was brilliant. It was absolutely amazing, and I was really stunned at how good those fragrances are. And I don't know if you have any of that you like from that house, but it
Oh yeah.
really, yeah, just pushed the envelope so much of what I would have thought are what is perfume, right? And I, particularly like Marquis de Sade, and that's just
I was gonna say 1740 and
yeah,
Rare Fidelis are my two favorites from the
yeah.
house.
Yeah, the incredible work and Noir Patchouli in 1969, and there's a whole bunch of really, really good ones from that in 1899, and there's some brilliant, brilliant fragrances from that house. But it really kind of opened my head up a lot. And I thought, God, this is really curious. And I remember I went to Fragrantica just looking, at some of the articles and reading around different blogs and stuff, and I started writing little reviews, and it was kind of a fluke thing that I started writing, and I was contacted by one of the editors who said, "Oh, are you going to be? Can you cover this event for us in Boston for Guerlain?" They had a representative there, and I said, "Yeah, why not? Sure." And he said, "Are you going to be in New York? Can you do this thing for Bond Number 9?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And before I knew it, I was getting really, interested in fragrance again in this really kind of Renaissance way, as I was also simultaneously growing an incredible interest in, like, whoa, there's all these materials now that I want to gain more interest in as well, and understand more. So they started happening really at the same time, I'd say.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So are you 100% self-trained, or did you have any professional training that kind of brought you to the point of kind of becoming a perfumer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say nowadays, I don't know if anyone, I mean, technically speaking, I'm self-trained, but I think that you are also the product of all the things around you that you learn. So when you surround yourself by good people and good perfumers, you learn a lot. So when you meet other perfumers, you you know you learn a lot of things from them. Particularly, like, let's say that you were really confused about how to make a certain accord or something, and you find out from someone like, oh, okay, that's how that's made, or that's why this doesn't smell correctly. And what I think that someone who's more classically trained does is they're getting a far more academic exercise. So there's a lot more information that's squeezed into a shorter amount of time. I think when you're self-taught, you usually do a lot more stumbling around, because you're kind of pulling from this book here or this book here, in a conversation here and a conversation there. And so it's kind of a slower, it's a bit more of a slower process. And so you're cobbling your own curricula together, if that makes sense, as
So it
opposed
can
to
be
maybe, yeah.
kind of an advantage too, you think, for not having the professional training?
I think there are times when I think the professional training is certainly good. And I have a very good friend of mine who just finished a course at Jeep in Grasse. And what's great about professional training, of course, is that it's very rigorous, and they put you through a lot of rigor, and they tell you, okay, identify this, identify that. And it can be pretty daunting, and they're really asking you to rise very high in your skill level, and really asking you to smell and scrutinize very closely. I think they, and no disservice to any of the academic services out there, but I think when you are learning on your own, you tend to be really scrappy, right? You're more of a bulldog in a way. Like, you're kind of, you're kind of learning things as you go. You're stumbling into mistakes, and sometimes you might find some things that go together that you might not have done. Also, a lot of the schools tend to be in France, and France has a very particular way of making fragrances. And it's very good. It's stuck around for a long time, and a lot of people like the French sort of approach to perfume. But I think it can be a very particular kind of perfume that maybe isn't always hey DJ, I'm just noticing DJ. You're right, you can get there's some advantage of of learning on your own, and that you can stumble into some cool stuff that maybe you wouldn't have done academically. Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of these I guess you would put January Scent Project in these indie house, I would kind of put it with the indie houses, I guess.
Mhm.
But I had Mark Sage of Clandestine Laboratories on recently. I've had
Yeah.
Liz Moore's on the channel. I did a Darren Allen live stream. He wasn't on yet, but he did offer to join, which would be great one day. But I've noticed there's a lot of up and coming brands. Liz Moore's in the UK. I don't know why I mentioned her, but there's a lot of up and coming brands, in America, almost like a little bit of a renaissance there. You mentioned France. What do you think is driving kind of the American perfumer scene? Because you mentioned a fragrance you made actually for American perfumer.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too when Dave Kern, the guy who runs American Perfumer, he asked me to write a kind of opening piece for him about him starting the store and sort of like what's the kind of outlook of American perfumery right now. And I can't remember when that was, but this was a couple of years back when I wrote that, and I sort of did an overview. And what you're saying is true. There is something happening in the States, which a lot of people out in non-US folks are looking at and saying, hey, what's going on over in the US? It's interesting. And I've sort of likened it sometimes to that initial kind of Lewis and Clark expedition where folks were just sort of walking through the US and doing this kind of survey of, okay, what's out here, and a lot of these initial drawings and observations of flora and fauna, and kind of trying to stake out and sort of like understand the landscape and what exactly was there and whatnot. And it's a bit like that where there's not a lot of boundaries and a lot of rules, or there's a lot of iconoclasts out there who are just sort of saying, well, I'm not going to use a lot of rules, I'll just do what I want. Now, having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to have like fantastic perfumery in the process. Like you can occasionally get some stuff that's interesting but not wearable, right? That'll happen. But I think there's always, it's I don't want to get too poetic or even project too much silliness into it, but there is this kind of North American idea of just sort of building yourself up from nothing, or trying an idea that hasn't been done before, inventiveness. It is kind of a story that's been told before, and I'm sort of surprised that it's still being told again. And it's so interesting that it happened to fall into perfume as well too, right? Isn't it? It's curious, isn't it, that happened again? But it is, you're right, I do think it's happening here very much.
There is something to be said about going against the stream and trying something different and putting out something that is unique and challenging and different from what you smell at Macy's and stuff like that. I think the big brands have gotten so caught up in using the same materials and doing flankers and all of this stuff that I think maybe the real perfume heads have started to kind of shun a little bit, and it's opened up this hole in the fabric of the perfume universe for brands like January Scent Project to kind of come in and fill that gap. It's almost like it's kind of needed, if you will.
Yeah, I think what I see too, and this could be a big topic in its own, is that you'll read about fragrances out there, particularly like more mass market fragrances, where people will pick up a note or an accord, and they'll say, God, I really love that one thing in there, but boy, I wish there was more of it, or I wish it was bigger, or it is or the idea was expanded upon, like, because it's kind of settled into a nice, a nice setting, a sort of like polite setting, and they want something that's dirtier or rougher, right? Something along those lines. And I think that's where a lot of the more independent perfumers will come in and say, yeah, all right, I'll do that. I'll take you up on that, and I'll make it dirtier or more aggressive or more floral or more whatever those things might be. But it's less bound, obviously, because the scale is smaller. It's less bound by sort of market considerations or things like that.
Or market testing, right? You don't have to prescribe to some focus group to make the lowest common denominator happy. You can kind of put out stuff that you want to put out, and in a way, you kind of have maybe even a little bit more freedom than your classically trained friends who are kind of stuck in doing whatever the client says.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, because I think they're, for some of those folks, they're doing a more specific task where they're fulfilling a need for a client, or they have like sort of a contractual need to create a fragrance for a specific audience. I mean, when you're running your own business, your own house, like the test will be, do people care? Do people buy it? However that works out, so, and you do have, more chance to be more creative. You also have more chance to fail too, but you're not going to fail at quite the large margins that you might for, a very big house that staked everything on a successful perfume release. Right. So.
Yes, that's right. Now you also do the artwork for these, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about these artworks. How do they portray the scents, and how did you kind of come up with some of these?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because part of it was it started from a really funny point of view, actually, because in the very beginning, I had put out sort of an initial first 3 fragrances, and I remember, and you've probably done some of this, I'm sure, in your research and whatnot. There was this sort of golden age of illustration in fragrance advertising, and I'd say that was roughly between the late 40s up till about the early to mid 60s in American French, and actually you still see it. It's actually international, but where before now it's all pretty much gone photography, and there's some great photography in perfume, but there was this really interesting period where a lot of artists were trying to capture some pretty abstract ideas about perfume alongside tools like pen and pencil and all that. And so they wanted to, use artistic means to describe one part of a fragrance. So I just gave myself a dare, which was like, what would one of these perfumes look like if you had found it in a magazine in like 1955? And the first one was the one Eiderantler, which to me is the most retro-y looking one of the illustrations. And that could easily, in my mind, could have probably come out of a magazine in like, I don't know, like somewhere in the mid 50s, maybe. And that was the beginning of it. And I thought, that's interesting. And so I thought, well, why don't I keep doing this, as I go on? So I kept working on them, but I made a rule for myself, which is to make sure that I did these digitally so that I could blow them up to any size if I wanted to. So these are all done, through digital means, through like Adobe Illustrator. They're all done so that I could, like play with the layers, and I could animate them later if I wanted to too. So they're really, as much as they look kind of old school, they're also much more like on the tech edge. They're not just like drawn by hand. So
Nice.
yeah. And it also, I liked the idea. A lot of people have said to me what they liked is that it's sort of just one more clue about the scent. It's not telling you how to wear it. It's not saying like only people who look like this should wear it, or it's nothing like that. It's just one more little visual clue I'm giving you about this world of the perfume.
Yes.
And yeah, I like just that little hint, nothing, over your head.
Well, you mentioned your friend Gardoni. I've got a bottle of Quoium here, and
awesome.
If you go to his website, I don't know if you've ever been,
Yeah,
but there's no blurbs.
no,
It's just kind of like a series of a couple pictures, and then you decide what they mean. You know what I mean? Like it almost puts the onus back on you. Instead of writing some blurb and saying, "Hey, this is what it is," it's like, here's some clues, and you decipher it, almost like looking at a piece of art.
Yeah. No, I remember he changes his site up once in a while, but sometimes I went to his site once and I'm like, what the hell am I looking at? It was just like some guy like writing on top of a pig or something like that on the front page, and that was it. No, it's amazing. And sometimes it's so audacious in a way. I'm like, wow, he's kind of like just going to do his thing. And you got to respect it. Right.
It is. That's kind of the first thing that came to mind, but I like that because I do see fragrance as an art form. Mm-hmm. And I do see it as kind of, we could smell the exact same thing and have 2 completely different interpretations of that same smell.
Yeah.
Right. So I think these are kind of a neat little touch, if you will.
Cool.
Do you have any perfumers or perfume houses that you kind of, looked up to once you started to get going? Did you have any like motivators from the past?
Yeah, there's been quite a few. I mean, it's funny because it sort of shifts a lot, and you find your interests kind of move around, quite a bit. But I definitely would say that Gaultier was a big influence for me, and I think particularly because he I think of one. I just grabbed a couple things out of my like big old box back there, but like one of the things of his that I smelled that I remember was like it was like Bocanera, one of his, which is that really thick like chili pepper and chocolate kind of a thing. But
yes, I did a video on that one.
Yeah,
it's good.
It's so good. And what I love about it is it's so thick and opaque. You know what I mean? It's almost like I think there's one image that he on his site it's a picture of him with like just chocolate on his face or something like
except for
right.
like the mouth, right?
Right.
Or the nostrils, or
it's nuts. Whatever it is, it's absolutely nuts. But what I find is sometimes his textures are almost like they're. You got to admire somebody who can make something that's like a wall. Like it's like, they talk about wall of sound from the 60s, and this is like wall of scent sometimes, right? It's just absolutely crazy. So his fragrances I like a lot. I've really big fan of Serge Lutens. Really enjoy a lot of their perfumes. And that was a very early influence for me. I think also the first time that I smelled such a wide range of different things that come from one fragrance house. He does these sort of, kind of ghostly kind of flowers, and then he does these really thick syrupy type fragrances, and then he does, all these different kind of woodsy things. It's funny to read comments as you're speaking. But,
yes, you got to kind of multitask.
You do. So that's a big influence. One of the things that actually drew me to your channel was the fact that you had interviewed Russian Adam, and something funny about I really, really love his work a lot, and
huge fan.
Yeah, big fan. I had the real pleasure of being able to write about his work a lot for Fragrantica, and really hard to not, first of all, I admire his approach. I mean, I love the fact that, I'm not sure if he's still quite doing it as much. Well, I guess he is, but at one point he was doing every damn thing, right? I mean, every single piece of it he touched, and that's wild, of course. And I loved, sometimes I would just chat with him and he would talk about these distillations, and especially I think a distillation he did for which one was it? It was one of the really heavy spice ones from, is it Ambre de Coco? I don't know if it was that one or another, but one from the last release where he said there's like 100 spices in this one distillation he did. And I'm like, damn, it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. So I guess I like perfumers who tend to do really heavy stuff, but I kind of admire people who are really dedicated to craft, who kind of have a vision and they really just see it through. They really want to just keep working at it, even if it's slightly mad and crazy. They just really want to see this singular vision through. And I see Russian Adam's a little like that too. Having said that, he does have a really, really good, I think people often don't give him credit for just these absolutely beautiful constructions he makes. Like they're sometimes, they're thrown off by the names, and they're actually like really light and beautiful in some ways. Like they have deep notes to them, but then they'll fade off into these like incredible gauzy, something like Civet de Nuit, or, like those are, or trying to think of like, or even like Aqualaria Blossom or something like those are, beautiful ethereal kind of perfume. So he's another perfumer that I really admire too.
He is a beautiful human being too. It's been a pleasure getting to know him. He is, and the thing about Adam that I would say the reason why we get along so well is that he is just completely dedicated to his craft, and he loves what he does. Like his passion just shines through. You can't help but notice when you talk to him how much he really loves perfume. He sent me a video one day of him like spraying himself like 30 times with this bottle of Guerlain Heritage, which he had never smelled until I basically was like pounding the table. Dude, you got to smell Heritage. And he bought 2 bottles and he used them all in like a month.
It's amazing.
But he is just, he's just so passionate. No, I love Adam's work. What are some of your favorites from him?
So I'm a really, some of mine are a little off the beaten path, like people would say. And don't forget too, I kind of joined the train a little late compared, because some people talk about stuff from like 5 years ago, and
Yeah,
I haven't smelled it, and of course there's none left, right? Too,
right.
so, right. So
Like
for me,
this one.
it's I would say people are gonna be, oh yeah, see, that's, yeah, man, that's just like, that's beautiful. I'm a big fan of what are almost, people would say, are really polar opposites, but I absolutely love Siberian Summer, which I know it's not, people don't write much about
I
it
do
or
too.
talk much, but I think it's a little, he mentions like some of the fragrances being poems. Like, to me, that's a poem. It's like a really beautiful poem.
Beautiful musk.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of War and Peace.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can't even say that that's an easy wear. It's not at all. It's a that's a tough perfume. Which I think is pretty deliberate. Well, I don't, it's a tough thing to say, because I think his view on what's wearable and not, of course, is going to be different from a lot of other people.
Yes.
But
are you an Oud fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely a big Oud fan. And Oud, of course, is like my whole Oud sense of what Oud is. It was really expanded crazily when I went to visit Rising Phoenix down in Georgia, and he's got crazy amounts of Oud down there. I learned so much about Oud, man. I'll tell you, I smelled more Oud than, gosh.
I am really interested in getting to know his work. Someone sent me for the very first time, they sent me a 2017 release from him called Mitikina King. And I never tried it, but I've worn it to bed. It's only a 0.3 gram little thing. Man, I've worn it to bed for like a week straight. Like, it is perfect for bed. I got to check out more of his work. This Rising Phoenix house is definitely on my radar.
Yeah, he's also really good. Like, he sources a lot of great stuff, and he's got access to, some Ouds that, I mean, I remember this long weekend I was down there, and I was smelling, these crazy Kinams, and then also just some, kind of more middle of the road Ouds, but I was shocked at, my perception of Oud just being the very skanky kind of stuff, and going in and coming out realizing that there's like Ouds that smell like mint, like just pure mint, and
there's
then
so
others
much.
and then Ouds that smell, more just like an old cedarwood plank, or some that smell a lot like sandalwood and citrus, and so there's just this huge range with kind of a common through line to them. But I also realized at the same time that I can understand why and this is again why I admire Adam and some of the people who've been able to use really good Oud in a broader releases, is that it's a real challenge to make good Oud perfume in large scale. It's very hard to do.
Yes.
It would bankrupt. Yeah, it would bankrupt a lot of people. And also, yeah, exactly. It isn't made for that. And also, I think it's sometimes doing a disservice to the actual oil, because to be frank, and this will answer probably some questions out there, is like, if you have a really good Oud, really good Oud, and you start diluting that in order to like make it work in a perfume, you're not doing that Oud or your wearer much of a service, to be honest. You're just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's heartbreaking to do that in a way, because it does lose a lot of its potency. And I think some of the more subtle facets of it, they kind of can get lost by, another component in the fragrance, which is just louder. It's not necessarily more subtle or better. It's just louder. And so it doesn't scale well. And I think that's why for the longest time, it just never was really part of the Western, for lack of a better phrase, the Western palette. It's not very good for scale.
Well, I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, that Oud craze, like from 2000, when Tom Ford did Oud Wood in 2007, and then all the way to, when it turned into, if you were anyone who was anyone in 2011, 12, 13, you had an Oud fragrance,
Of course. Yeah,
I don't think it's going to get back to that level of, just hype.
Right.
But I think that it's here as an ingredient from here on out to stay. And actually, I was just about to mention that a couple of my favorites from you, like Smolder Rose and Vaporocindro, you have an Oud note in there. Is it a challenge? Has it been a challenge to incorporate it in your perfumes?
It's funny. I'll tell you, it's not. It isn't. Well, it's two things here. So this like to make for something that kind of goes in the main line of perfumes. It's not at all. In fact, I probably would do more. Um, but there are a lot of folks out there who, and not that I'm always taking a test of like, oh, what does the audience want? I don't. But I love working with Oud, and I wish I had more time to just dedicate to working with Oud. And I also part of the reason I started spinning up this limited edition series, like once a year I put out a limited edition, is that I can use rare ingredients that just go into like a 100 bottle batch of something, and that's it. And I only do it once. And for one of them that I did use a very small amount of a rare Oud that I got, which I'm never going to get again. And people, yeah. The thing is,
I'll let you answer that in a second if you want, but continue. I'm sorry.
Specifically, yeah, sure. So that's where I actually, those are a lot of fun to make because, I know, okay, I don't have to worry about supply chains running out, or like I've got this great. I mean, I had this Oud that was sourced through a Turkish middle person. And I just know there was no way I was going to get this again. Somebody got it at a conference and they gave it to me. And I'm like, the label's half worn out, man. Like, where do I find it? I could barely, I got it tracked it to a website. The website was kind of wonky. And I was like, dude, I'm never going to find this again. They're like, look, that's all I got, man. I'm sorry. So I knew, all right, I have to use this once and that's it. But it was the best thing I ever smelled. And I was able to put it in this one limited release. But I love using it. Using it in a way that is affordable is tricky. So what I generally tend to do is I get from one source that's more affordable. Is it the best Oud in the world? No, and that of course not. That would make fragrances that would be no one could afford. And I'm not saying
our levels
exactly, and our level of stuff, which is beautiful stuff. And I'm not saying that isn't a great project maybe to do on the side as another project. I'd love to do something like that someday. And maybe I will, because I am really interested in Oud and in more sort of precious materials. But I think that for work that's reproducible without too much batch variation, so that there, you need to get a more reliable source of agarwood / Oud that is fairly reliable and you could use more regularly. So if you find one supplier that you like and the Oud smells pretty good and it's not going to kill you in terms of finances, and it's not going to make you have to shoot the price up too high, then I think it's a good deal to work with.
I was going to ask you about reformulations because you mentioned the Oud, but also when people use naturals like ambergris or things like that, it's hard to keep the smell exactly the same as the years go on, right?
Yeah.
The synthetic stuff is a lot of the big brands like the big synthetics because they're easily reproducible at the exact same smell and all this stuff. Do you use naturals to the point where you have to kind of reformulate the fragrances from year to year to make sure that they smell the same?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of the answer is a little like, it depends, right? And so far I've never had to do, as of yet, a major reformulation where something is completely different. There's one perfume which is probably going to have to get reformulated. And the weirdest part about this is that I don't know where the heck I said it. It must have been in some semi-public way. And I swear within 2 weeks, someone was like, I heard that this got reformulated. I'm like, no. But so that's Eiderantler. And there's two reasons for it. It has a kind of, there's a white cedar in it, a Canadian white cedar, which actually there's a version of that cedar, which is easier to find. That's in Burvuvu, which is okay. But you'll just find these sudden gaps that appear in the market for certain ingredients. And the pandemic made that much worse, where for whatever supply chains will just suddenly dry up. And one of them is you'll probably hear some perfumers talk about, there was this incredible source for many of us for natural materials in the Pacific Northwest called White Lotus, and they were in business since the 1970s. And when they went out of business, there was like ripples everywhere. Like, you can't do this to us. Like, how, you are our main supplier of, this rare ingredient or that rare ingredient. And they went out of business, I want to say in 2019. And you're still to this day hearing people not being able to buy things that they were able to source, and no one has been able to pick up again since then.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I remember Mark Sage talking about that on the interview that we did. That must have really affected a lot of the smaller houses.
Well, even beyond that, what this guy had done in particular that was great is he built these very personal relationships over, you know, decades with distillers in India and Sri Lanka and in Southeast Asia and other parts of Southeast Asia, and it had enabled him to create his own supply chains for certain things, and some of them were really niche ingredients, like stuff that no one else. I think he was probably giving some supplies to some slightly larger scale perfume houses, but I mean something like Zdravats, which is like this Zdravets. Sorry, it's a flower similar to like a geranium flower. Which no one quite carries exactly what he was carrying, for example. And I know that a couple niche houses were carrying fragrances that had this flower in it. I don't see it anywhere anymore. But anyway, there's two kinds of lavenders that he used to carry. One which was a lavanden, which is a lavender hybrid, which is incredibly sweet, very thick, very green. That is in Eiderantler, which I'm running out of sources for it, and it's just not really being made anywhere. And I think that's going to necessitate a bit of a change, and problems finding certain cedars, which is going to probably necessitate a change. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't try to work with other materials, and that's where I kind of argue against some of the conspiracy theories about like, oh, they've totally changed it and it's never going to be the same. I mean, the skill of a perfumer is to go in there and find a way to make it smell as good as the previous one or improve it. I mean, that's the difference between a good and a bad perfumer, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's
your job. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Rich, Mitch, and I have had this conversation many a times where, you know, we talk about brands that have in-house perfumers tend to do better reformulations. It just seems that way. It seems like the Chanels of the world and, you know, the Cartiers of the world, the ones that have the in-house perfumers take better care of their products over time.
Yeah.
I'll let you respond to this question because I've had it up on the screen for like half an hour now. It says, yo, John, how many estimate people have bombarded you about a specific past release, which I won't name?
Oh, there have been many. In fact, there have been a few just in the past couple of days, actually. Yeah. So, in fact, I believe you have a sample of that with you. You have a bit somewhere there. This one called Attaupe. Yeah, that was a very, very limited release, and there's scarce a little bit of it left. Scarce, which that was I noticed a little bit remaining, tiny bit remaining, which some folks I believe I said on a stream somewhere that there was a small bit remaining, and there's like this like kind of like rush of, you know, like what so, there've been quite a few comments about that recently. So
very interesting. Well, I guess we're 45 minutes in, so this is a good time to say we've got John Biebel on from January Scent Project. If you guys just wandered in and have no clue what we're doing here, that's what we're doing. Quick interview. Do just leave your questions in the chat for him. I'm just kind of starring them as we go along, and then we can do some Q&A from the audience at the end. But I've got some questions here. So can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, your creative process? What does it look like from going from, let's say, a brief in your head or a brief that you come up with to the end product, to the bottle?
Yeah, sure thing. So what I described this once to somebody else, and I deviated a little from the process, but I started out originally, oh, hey, Mitch, by the way, good to see you, sir, where I saw my sort of learning process with perfume is that there were a lot of these sort of families of fragrances that I wanted to learn about. And, you know, one of them was like learning about fougere and how that's made. And, once I have done one thing, I had this kind of picture in my head. I'm not synesthetic, or I'm not of that ilk, but I tend to view things more like in pictures or spatially sometimes. And so I saw myself standing somewhere where I just finished making a fragrance composition, and I have like this rock in my hand, and I just sort of throw it as far as I can. You know, if you picture like on a globe or something, and it just falls somewhere. And I think, all right, I'll go all the way over there. And it could be really far from what I just did. But the whole point is I really want to explore something I haven't done before. So I kind of give myself like a challenge to use a material I haven't used, to, explore different stuff. Oh, nice. Hey, what's going on, man? And in the process of doing so, it enables me to learn a lot about something else, to create new composition, to study on different things, but also just to familiarize myself with a new array of different things. So that's one thing I like to do. Other times is that I just am keeping this constant like index of things, ideas that I have, things I would like to work on. The brief idea for me, I don't treat that in any sort of traditional way at all. And that's part of the reason why I kind of resist doing a lot of ad copy on my site, where I don't really want to, I don't like writing. It's funny because I write for Grantica, but I don't like writing about my own work. And I don't like to, mostly because I don't want to give people this preconception about what I set out to do and then what they're supposed to smell like. I believe that's up to the the smeller to decide. So I get an idea in my head of sort of generally what I'd like to portray. And part of the reason that I tend to also come up with these slightly nonsensical names, or these names with words mashed together or words from different languages, is that I also don't want to force an idea about the etherealist. Hey, man. I don't want to force an idea on the smeller based on the name either. Like I don't want to also, like if I give something a French name, or to elevate it, or if I give it something a very, kind of whatever the different names I could put on it. I don't want to force anything down your throat. I want you to kind of come to it on your own terms. And so for me, the brief is this really organic idea. Sometimes they're very specific, like the fragrance Horla had very specific intentions. It's based on a short story by Guy de Maupassant, and which partially explains the kind of funky illustration that's going on there. But other times it's it develops as I go. It's organic. I have ingredients that I'm interested in putting together. It develops as it works. And then a name, an image, an idea all kind of come together at one time by the end. I do tend to spend a long time on my perfumes. Like I do at a maximum, maybe 2 a year. Whereas, some houses release a lot of fragrances. I don't really work at that pace. I tend to spend a lot more time on them. So,
yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. No, that was awesome. Do you have any materials that you really love to work with, or that you've kind of fallen in love with as you've now you January Scent Project, the first fragrance according to Parfumo was 2017. So you've got about 7 years under your belt now. So are there any like materials that you've kind of fallen in love with over that time?
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I smelled sandalwood, I felt like I couldn't really smell much, and it's funny how those large molecules sometimes will kind of elude you, right? And then I have grown to absolutely love sandalwood. Like I can't even begin to explain like how beautiful sandalwood is. And so that is something it's such an incredible, and it's so soft, and it's such a the best sandalwoods are rich, soft. They're not loud, so they're kind of in their own category altogether. And when I visited with Phoenix down in Georgia, he had sandalwoods that were just so, God, I can't even describe them. They were so crazy. They were so beautiful.
Stunning.
Yeah, I mean, that I was, transfixed by like, whoa, I thought I was smelling good sandalwood. This is even crazier than the rest of the sandalwood. So that's one thing. There are some other naturals that I really love. Balsam fir is a gorgeous smell. It's a very sweet, very, it's sort of like one of the sweetest of the fir or pine smells. Just absolutely, like, it's sort of like that sort of Christmas in a bottle type of smell, but it's also just, there's so much that you can do with it in perfumery. It's it's a really versatile material. it's got that kind of it's sort of somewhere between being woodsy and just the tiniest bit floral. So that's one thing I really love. Rose I've learned to love a lot too. In fact, I started off with a rose fragrance. Rose is a bit strange because there's so much there's only a couple of species of rose that we actually use in perfume, and you can make a lot of accords of rose, and each one might smell slightly different based on how you tweak it. So there's a lot you can do with the notion of rose, but I really have a particular love of rose. And along that way, I also really like rosewood a lot. I think it's beautiful. It's not the longest lasting fragrance note in the world. It tends to be more of a mid to top kind of note, but when it's there, it's nothing quite smells like rosewood. That's another thing that's really, really beautiful as well too. Yeah,
fantastic. I love rosewood as well. I've told this story before, but my mom, and since it's Good Friday, I'll tell it again. My mom had these rosary beads from the Holy Land, and every Easter she would make me sit down and pray the rosary with her, and the smell of the rose wood from those beads, I mean, I could smell like they were brand new. It's a beautiful smell, and that I love rosewood. I also love sandalwood. Did you ever get into kind of going down the rabbit hole of Mysore sandalwood versus Australian sandalwood versus New Zealand sandalwood? Do you have any favorites?
Yeah. So it's an interesting road to go down, and what I find intriguing about them is that they're all really different, and they're very different. And in fact, when I was at the World Perfumery Congress this past year, in fact, Rachel, I think Rachel may have said that she was there as well. There were a number of sandalwood representatives there. That was fascinating for anybody who wants to learn more about the sort of tech aspects of what goes into perfume. That conference is amazing. It's really geeky, and it's great for all those things. But so there was a lot of people, offering up sandalwood and talking about why, these harvests of sandalwoods are these sort of sandalwoods from these areas are good for these reasons and not. And one of the things that I found particularly interesting is the new, I don't know how new this is, but the sandalwood that they're growing from the Mysore, actual Mysore seeds and plants, but it's grown in northern Australia now, which has its own distinct smell. It doesn't smell, of course, exactly like Mysore sandalwood, but it's pretty amazing. The Mysore sandalwood that I smelled at Rising Phoenix Place is, it's crazy. It was crazy good. And I don't actually have any old, well-aged Mysore right here. I have just a little bit in the studio, and I've never used any in perfume. I do like some of the Australian, like the New Caledonian type sandalwood. It's got a kind of creaminess to it, and almost like a slightly metallic tinge at the top, which I find interesting. Almost, and also like a vegetable aspect, like
pickly, right?
Yeah. I really like those qualities of it.
I was going to ask because you've smelled, I assume, Santal 33. That's kind of the poster child for this.
It completely is,
punchy, almost like a punchy, pickly sandalwood. Do you like that? I mean, some people hate it, and some people like it.
I do. I can't say that I love Santal 33 too much. It's not my favorite in the world, but it's one of the few perfumes that it's so ubiquitous, man. It was where everybody was smelling. I don't hate it, but it definitely is the pickliest. And I don't even hate the pickle smell either. I don't. It's definitely one of the most pickly smelling things though. But I like that quality in sandalwood. And what I like is that sometimes it's something you can really work with and bend and twist to your own, with certain other materials that will really work for you in a good way. Like that mixed with other spices is fantastic. Like that really works well with certain spices. Some of the really truly deeper and creamier Indian sandalwood, some of those are just wow, those are just like butter, they're just like pure butter and wood, and they're just beautiful. So I think there's something really honestly to appreciate in all of them. I just smelled also this there's a distillate that's available from Eden. It's a Hawaiian sandalwood, which is peculiar and interesting. And I don't know if it's the best in the world, but it's certainly intriguing, and I'll probably drop it into something soon. It's really, I don't know quite what. I mean, it's got it. I'm running out of adjectives here, but it's got its own qualities that I really like too. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Have you, on the other side, on the flip side of the coin, have you come across any ingredient materials that you actively dislike, or that just you don't enjoy working with, or you don't enjoy them being in your perfume?
There's some that I find, I'll tell you this much, like there's some that I find more challenging to work with. Now, having said that, I have a really good friend, my friend Michael, who, he's my friend who went to Jeep, and he's working on launching his brand really soon. He works in the perfume industry, and he said one of the best projects he gives himself is that when he, brick stairwell. When he gets a material that he doesn't like, he immediately tries to make something with that material he doesn't like as a little project. Like, and it was a really valuable lesson for me to learn. Like, whoa, that's a great thing to do. And I've been trying to challenge myself with that every once in a while. I would say some things that stick out for me are, I'm not nearly as skilled with using, hey, Adam, how are you, man? We were just talking about you. Some of the flowers I find can be really wonderful, but they can be hard to use in compositions, and they're also very hard to reproduce sometimes. And some I really love, and some I find more difficult. Like, one thing that for the longest time I could not work well with, but I just now am finally starting to work with, is osmanthus. And then for a long time, it didn't quite appeal to me. And I didn't really, it seemed like a complicated, very subtle smell to me. Now I'm like absolutely loving it because I finally embraced it. Now I see it having all this potential. And
I love it too. I love that leathery, apricot-y.
Yeah.
It's
a shapeshifter. Yeah, it absolutely is. But other things, I try to see the good and all, but I'm just quickly though thinking here, there's definitely some stuff that I like less than others. I would say stuff like when I made the perfume Gong, part of my deliberate approach there was to make something that was a little lighter and used more fruit. And I've noticed that fruit notes are hard to use in perfume. I found them difficult, and they're not my favorites. And
let me spray it while you're talking.
Sure. Yeah. That one I specifically chose blueberry as a recreation, and that was a real challenge. I spent a good month just working on blueberries, as a blueberry accord.
I'm going to use it as a blotter.
Yeah. Oh, by all means, go right ahead, man. Before that though, I found fruit notes are kind of tricky and not always my favorite. I think there's also a perception that maybe fruit notes, as nice as they are, they're like very similar to food. And I like gourmands to an extent, but there's a lot of gourmands, and I think you can do gourmands well and you can do them not as well, So I'm careful with gourmands. I don't want to overdo the gourmand thing too much. Yeah,
it's a tough genre. I mean, because I don't really like sweet fragrances, so a lot of gourmands are no-nos for me. So I could totally see how it would be a tough genre. But this actually, for me, I thought this was like the most maybe wearable of your entire line. Like if someone wanted what I would consider like a daily driver fragrance, like something that you just don't have to think, you just grab it, spray it, and go. Mm-hmm. I thought Gong was kind of that fragrance for me, because even though it had like some interesting notes, like daikon radish, I don't think I've ever smelled a radish note in a fragrance before, and I don't know if I have many fragrances with green pepper in them.
I'll tell you a slightly funny story about the daikon radish. So part of the reason that even came into why would that even come up as a thing in my head, right? Is that one of the, a lot of people gained interesting hobbies during the pandemic. So one of my hobbies was I started watching YouTube food channels. Like I started following chefs on YouTube, and one of them was a young woman who was a Chinese chef, and I was so interested listening to all these crazy, recipes and techniques she had. And one of them was how to make pickles at home. And these are like sort of saltwater based pickling. And one of the things she said, the best pickles came from daikon radish. And I thought, really, radishes? And she was right. They were incredible. But one morning I came in the kitchen, and you have to like sort of wash, scrub, cut these things, and you let them dry overnight before you put them into the pickle brine. And the whole kitchen smelled of daikon radish, and it was the most amazing smell. And I couldn't stop thinking of that damn smell. And I thought, oh, there's just got like people, the world needs to know of this really incredible, like green, slightly pungent, mustardy smell. It's a beautiful, beautiful smell. And I was really determined. To put this into a fragrance somehow. So I worked really hard on that accord. And lo and behold, it did manage somehow to wind up there.
I was going to say that had to be a tough one, because there's no radish essential oil that you can just put in here. So
there is not.
that's good stuff.
Oh, thanks, man.
I actually really like the blueberry note in here. That's also a note that I don't think I have very many fragrances with that blueberry note, but as far as like an easy to wear, musky, fruity fragrance, I liked Gong. I thought it was very well made. I was going to see if once we were done kind of chatting, I know we're about an hour in, but we maybe go through each one of the fragrance and talk a little bit about it. But since you brought up Gong, is there anything else on Gong that you would want to mention?
Yeah, the only thing that was interesting about it was the first time I decided to go a little out. I took a slightly different approach here in that I did add a lot of different accords together, and that was very, as you can see, like it went into vegetables and all kinds of kind of crazy things. But the ultimate goal, though, was to make this something that could be worn in hot weather and was a little bit on the lighter side. Definitely had musk as the base, which I hadn't done a musk based perfume before. And so I set out for a goal that I hadn't done before, using musk and all these things. The other thing that was interesting about it is I combined it with a music project, which was a completely crazy thing. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to record some music along with it, which I did. And I made a record, and it has 2 of the tracks have gongs in them and everything. So it was this kind of crazy thing that just took on a life of its own, which was really fun and unexpected, And I thought, okay, I've played that out as much as I can, and now I can move on. But it was a good experience to go through all that, though. It was good.
That's good stuff. So I've had a chance to basically now smell them all, except for the new limited edition ones that I haven't had a chance to spray yet. Do you think that January Scent Project as a house has a house DNA, like, Guerlain has the Guerlain Oud? Do you think you have a DNA yet, or is it still too early?
It might be early, although I do find there's certain things that I reach for, with some frequency, to the point that I'm like, no, you're not going to use that again. I'm very, it's too easy for me to reach for certain things because it's funny because I am definitely drawn to certain things that I know will produce certain results, and I want to be careful, and that's good. In fragrance, you want to something like wears well on skin, or it evaporates at a certain rate, or and that's good. Or other things are very good at doing the functional parts of perfume. They're really good at diffusing the fragrance in the air. They're very good at like adding longevity. Like for example, I love Hedione. Hedione is an incredible component. Some certain aldehydes, like there's a couple of aldehydes, or 1 or 2 aldehydes that really just a tiny little drop ends up in most of my fragrances. Even if it's not even discernible, but just like a ting, just to give it that little bit of air at the beginning to boost it up, Also, a couple of components that I think are really good. Yeah, some function. Cedar. I'm a big fan of cedar. That even just small drops of cedar, will sometimes end up in some of my fragrances. So I think there might be a little something, like I could probably mix up a little batch of something and say that's probably something akin to a Guerlain Oud, that, or a January Scent Project Oud, that Yeah, I could
JSP
probably
Oud.
JSP Oud. Yeah, maybe so.
Do you subscribe to the theory that Hedione attracts? Because, you know, there was the old thing back in the 60s. Steve McQueen, I believe it was, said he wouldn't have gotten as many girls as he did if it wasn't for the Hedione and Eau Sauvage. Do you subscribe to that, or do you think it's just a myth? Kind of like
you know, that's a fantastic point, and I will say Eau Sauvage is amazing stuff. Like Eau Sauvage is incredible. I will tell you this much: when I open up a bottle of High Cis Hedione, like that stuff is beautiful. It's beautiful, and you just feel like, God, what, you know, if this were a flower. And there is, I mean, you do find, you know, traces of this in other things, but I think that's why something like champaka, which is very close to magnolia flower, by the way. So I think you had asked about champa or champaka flower. They're almost, in fact, I think they have the same Latin name, but it's very similar to magnolia. So it smells an awful lot like magnolia if you took a little bit of the sweetness out of it. But that kind of a smell, it's an amazing smell and a very alluring smell. So I would probably agree with him. Yeah.
There's a little bit of a jasmine note to Hedione, isn't there?
It is. It is, without necessarily quite that indolic or heaviness kind of a how could you put it like that? Really, the funkiness that you might smell in certain jasmines, like Jasmine grandiflorum, or I'm sorry, more like the Jasmine sambac. Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about the boogeyman that some people like to avoid. IFRA. Is your house IFRA compliant? And do you think that IFRA destroyed the industry like some people try to make it seem?
Yeah, so I am IFRA compliant. The one case where I would mention that I cannot be as IFRA compliant in the limited edition, simply because I've been using some antique oils in those, which, you know, short of like having them lab tested, which, you know, in future iterations, I'm probably going to do that, especially if I'm going to do larger extent. It's hard to know exactly what's in some of the oils. Like I can do it based on what a modern version of an oil would be, but like yeah, that's right. Adam, actually, I have to say that Adam really was a direct influence on me in using antique oils. I thought, gosh, he's getting these great things out of antique oils. So that was definitely cool. I know. It put me on the hunt for some great things. So I tip of the hat definitely to you, Adam, for that. I appreciate it.
Lots of tips of the hats to Adam.
Indeed, sure. Absolutely, indeed. So with the limited editions, those are not, but I am with the other perfumes, and I'll explain why, and I'll talk a little bit about IFRA. So IFRA is sort of and it's important to also mention the fact too that there was just some legislation passed about how there's sort of new regulations coming in the US for and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to impact us now, but this came up recently. So those regulations are coming in the US within like the next 2 years, I think it is. So this is not going to be, the sort of like total crazy party that's been going on in the US is not going to last forever. So
if you want to stay IFRA compliant.
Yeah, right. So what IFRA does, a lot of people know, is that they are a volunteer organization that people can be part of, and it's a safety guideline organization. If you want to sell work in Europe, you know, your fragrances have to be tested, much more rigorous testing than you have in the US right now. Not nearly as high as the testing that goes on in Japan, which is, I think, the absolute highest and most difficult of anywhere in the world. But so they're about maybe middling or middle to high. For the most part, and here's where I think it's important to remember, IFRA is not that hard to follow. And this is where I think some people get a little crazy, and where, like, for example, there's often concern about something like, let's say, levels of oak moss. And there's a lot of really good alternatives to oak moss. You can still put oak moss in fragrances. It's a pretty small amount that you can put. But for the odor, oak moss still has a very strong odor impact though, and you can still use a decent amount of oak moss. You can create an accord using some pretty decent alternate chemicals that can create a good solid accord. And again, this speaks to the level of expertise of a perfumer. A good perfumer is going to be able to make good stuff, good accords that balance this out. And so complying is really not that hard. There are some occasions when you look at some of the rules and you're like, is it really, like some of the rules about lavender usage, I'm a bit like, is it really, because I mean, people, that's used as a kind of cure-all for different skin natural products for many years, and it doesn't seem to have caused a lot of people problems. But there are issues, particularly with things like skin sensitivity and like allergic reactions and stuff that are legit, and people need to respect that and follow that stuff. So I would only stress that people, I think, should not be, when you look at the things that are outright banned in perfume, there's not that many. The things that are given a sort of recommended dosage level, so they're restricted, there's more of those, but they're not prohibited. Like, I don't find that, oh my God, I can't make perfume anymore, they prohibit it. Like, it's not like that. It really isn't. You just have to look at the numbers. Occasionally you'll see something like, okay, I wish I could put a little more of that in there if I can. Every once in a while, the numbers will change and you realize, okay, that's a little high. I'm going to have to kind of, but there's ways to work with it and around it. I mean, not around it, like secretively work around it, but there's ways to work with it that I've not found that it's been, like I've had to say, I can never make this fragrance again. No, that hasn't happened so far. Yeah.
So you think, are you a vintage fragrance fan? And do you think that a lot of the maybe poor reformulations that we've seen over the years are less IFRA and more just the brands maybe trying to save money? Or
yeah, it's a good point. I had two thoughts about that. So I do love some vintages I think are great, and I'm particularly interested in what I consider to be like perfume archaeology, which I call it, which are like really old stuff. I mean, stuff from like the 1910s and 20s, like that kind of crazy stuff. Like that stuff fascinates me, and I try to find some of this stuff that's like still sealed, that's like 100 years old, like that. Yeah, exactly. You have to really poke around and find some crazy stuff like that.
I found a bottle of Bouquet de Faunes recently, and I'm in love with it.
Nuts! That's absolutely nuts.
It's fantastic.
That is so freaking cool.
But this is apparently the reformulated version. So the original came in a Lalique chalice with
so
three, almost like, they look like fawn heads, but apparently they're supposed to be some mythical creature, like half man, half fawn, from The Afternoon of a Fawn play, I believe it was.
Oh yeah, that's the Hawthorne novel. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I love the vintages as well.
Yeah.
What do you find that whenever you're hunting vintages, like I will specifically look for the ones that have the short ingredient list. So I try to find the older bottles, just because I found, there's such a big difference to the modern stuff, and whether it's IFRA, whether it's the houses saving on money, whether it's, just reformulations over time, whether it's the ingredients used from the big oil houses in the 70s and 80s were different. But I find vintage fragrances to be just better, to my nose anyways.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts about that. So I'm not as much of a vintage hunter the way that some folks are. Like, you probably go really deep down the rabbit hole for some of these, but I will, if there's a few things that I've found, like it's interesting you mentioned Eau Sauvage, even though I don't think it really survives too well. And I did an interesting article where I smelled about, was it like 12 different versions of Shalimar over the years, and one of the disappointments for me was vintage Shalimar really didn't smell that great to me. Actually, I thought it was a bit too, it had that really like petroleum kind of smell to it, which so some things I think age well, some things don't age as well. Sometimes they smell like nothing, like you just opened the bottle fresh. But that's the stuff I love, is when you find something that's like almost hermetically sealed in a tomb or whatever. Like, that's incredible. But I will say though, to your point about, are they badly reformulated? Are perfume houses like cutting corners or something? I think what's happening, I'll give you an example of something that's reformulated really well. So before they made a completely new version of it, but the Givenchy for Gentlemen, not that new version of it, but the original one, which is the one that smells like a classic fougere. Yeah, exactly. This one, yeah, which is beautiful. That stuff's gorgeous, right? That's a great fragrance. I mean, that's a something I really love, and yeah, perfect example, right? So they when you smell a modern version of that, and again, not the reformed where it's a completely different perfume, they've been able to maintain most of the smell of that pretty well. And it's still at an affordable price and everything. Now, in that case, because that is pretty oak moss heavy, it's pretty patchouli heavy and all that. Patchouli, not many restrictions on it at all. Patchouli, is cheap, so that's not too hard to reformulate that one. But I don't think they skimped corners on that one. I think that what you may find with other reformulations is that they sort of look at the old formula. They see two things. They see the fact that some of the ingredients are now, highly restricted by IFRA. Also, they see that audiences have changed, man, right? Like the audiences are younger. They don't quite a lot of folks don't quite want to smell like this. Now, I'm not saying you and some of you, like your reviewers, like, no, I want this old shit, right?
We're the 0.01. We're not the
right
audience.
They're looking at those spreadsheets, those reams of spreadsheets, saying like, they want those fruity things, and they want the sandalwoody things, and this. Right. Oh, very nice one. Yeah, they have these different, like, different criteria that they're working towards. And I want to say, and I won't really call it any names in particular, but I think that they're saying like, this is a good time for us to update this fragrance. Let's modernize it just a little bit. And I think that's where it happens, is they keep it sort of in the general ballpark or family of that fragrance, but they decide, let's update it. Let's make it more modern. Let's make some of the kids buy it,
Yeah, try to make Koros less pissy, or try to make, cut down on the I guess with Givenchy Gentleman, I mean, I actually have not smelled the new one, so I can't talk to that, but this is one of the fragrances I ended up backing up. I did a top 100 at River Board in 3 hours, and this made my top 10.
Oh, sweet. Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
I love Givenchy Gentleman. It actually made I did a top 22 patchouli countdown for the end of 2022, and this was my number one patchouli of all time. I love this stuff, so I'm a huge fan. But yeah, I'll have to get a modern and maybe do a little bit of a of a comparison. So
well, make sure it's not like they made a reform, like a new version of it. That's nothing.
Completely different. Yeah, they did like an eau de parfum, right?
Yeah, the modern take on that, I would be curious to see what you think of it. Definitely.
Yeah, that would be a good video. I like doing those comparison videos. The vintage versus the modern. I think there's not very much content like that on YouTube, just because that's like really niche. I mean, you really have to be a fragrance lover to watch a video on a fragrance from 1974 vintage versus you know what I mean? But I do like that stuff. So before we hop into the rest of your fragrances here, what was there one of these that was maybe like the most challenging for you to make, as far as like pulling your hair out, putting it together? Did you just beat your head against the wall trying to make one of these?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was watching your takes on the perfumes, and you had mentioned Vaporocindro, which I want to tell you a very funny story about the name. So that actually is from Esperanto, and it's the words vapor and cinder. But what was very funny, when I was at Essenza in Italy back in 2019, I stumbled into a group of Italians who happened to be, they smelled some of the January Scent Project perfumes, and they referred to it as Vaporocindro, and it apparently works very well in Italian, which I didn't know, and they were very excited about it and assumed it was an Italian name. In any event, that was a really tough perfume to make, and it's complicated. and it has a number of accords in it. It has a lot of stuff in it, a lot of different stuff. And
I like this one.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned.
Did you watch my live stream?
I did, and I actually liked the things you had to say about it, and I thought it was interesting. You go pretty deep in your analysis sometimes, which is very cool to watch, and I like how you were extracting different things out of it, which was very cool. And actually the fact that you extracted like that coffee to me is a really interesting perfume note, because it tends to be, I often call it the cinder block in perfume, because it's just like this chunk of a note. It's not ethereal and floaty. It's just a damn like freaking, foundation. But it's really, it's good, which plays a good important role in some perfumes. But my original inspiration for that, which definitely went off into some new areas, was I had been driving out on the Cape in Massachusetts, and you find a lot of houses that are they're made with cedar on the outside, and they often will just let the cedar, they don't treat the cedar, and they just let the wind and the salt water affect it. And I thought there's something about just looking at those cedar shingles, and what I wanted to create a smell that reflected what I saw when I saw those bare cedar shingles, and the way they kind of look all weathered and dry. And so it sort of became this idea of something that was very dry, and I wanted to use, like, the turmeric in there is actually really important, because that's like one of the driest spices I can think of. But then pair it with something that was really moist, which was sort of like the seawater, together. And that sort of, those dual notes of things that are wet and dry was kind of where that came from.
Have you ever smelled? Oh no, it's in a box. Have you ever smelled?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find it now. I put my perfumes in boxes, and the box I actually moved. And what did I do with the box? What did I do with the box? Now I won't be able to find it, of course. But it's here it is. The disadvantages of putting them in boxes. Have you ever smelled Cristobal for Homme by Balenciaga?
Oh God, yes, Balenciaga. Yeah. Which, that's so funny you mentioned that now, because I'm thinking like, that's an interesting parallel. That's an interesting parallel.
I mean, this is like one of my favorite Balenciagas. This has really grown on me. The first time I ever smelled it, I thought it was very designer. Like, this is a Gerard Anthony. Gerard Anthony is one of my favorite perfumers of all time. And I thought this was like the most designer Gerard, like the most maybe mainstream designer like fragrance release he ever did. But the more that I've worn it, the more I'm picking out these little nuances, and that's almost what Vaporocindro kind of felt like to me too.
Oh, that's interesting.
It could feel wearable, like it wasn't super crazy. I think maybe some of the crazier fragrances from your line are maybe like higher up on my list, because I like some of the weird stuff, but this one does a little bit. I think it does such a great job balancing that wearability versus some notes that, maybe some of the addicts like me want, like we want the Cuban, we want the oud, we want the, something to kind of pay attention to at hour like 6, 7, and 8. And Vaporocindro gave me that. I really enjoyed it.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Is there and there's real ambergris in this?
Yes, there is. Yeah. And it's part of an accord. So that's another thing, where like mixing a full accord, like by using just a touch of real ambergris, and then the larger accord that's built around it is sort of an important way to sort of, because if it was pure real ambergris throughout the whole thing, that would be, would be
obviously you couldn't do that.
But yeah, it's a beautiful material to. That's another thing I love working with. Some of the more the heavy but subtle animalics such as that, and and some of the musks and stuff like that are really nice to work with, even if they're kind of below the radar in a way. But yes,
it's beautiful stuff. Well, let's knock out some of these, because I wanted to get your take on some of these while we got you. Let's do my favorite, or what I'm thinking might be my favorite, and that is Serin.
Nice.
So Serin, I thought you were maybe playing a little coy with the note listing here.
Yes.
Marigold, sage, heliotrope, and incense, and that's it. Tell us a little bit about this bad boy.
Well, so yeah, the pressure did succumb a bit where, you know, people were saying exactly what you're saying. They're like, oh, come on, you know, and the thing was that I actually was frustrated because for once I had been looking at a Serge Lutens release and I noticed he did one of those same things. In fact, he was even more coy. I think he released 2 notes for one of his fragrances, and I was like, oh man, you know, and it's like fruit and cumin, and that was it, you know, and I was like, damn, and it's this beautiful perfume, and I thought, that's nuts, there's more to it than that, and I thought, oh, but wait a minute, I love the mystery of that, and so I thought, I'm going to really simplify this profile a lot and just stay on task and just, you know, sort of release the main components to it. But then there was pressure from other people saying, oh, come on, you got to tell us more about this. So on my website, I broke down some of these accords more, and I gave more detail about what's actually in the incense and what's in the marigold accord and all that. So for those who want to dive a little deeper, I provide more detail. But this was a kind of a labor of love, because I'm really interested in the smell of marigolds, and in particular the oil that comes from it, which is tagette, and that's you usually find that it comes from 3 primary sources. From Mexico, it grows. There's a lot of it that grows in Mexico, in France, and also in India, and they're all really embedded, particularly in India and Mexico. They're embedded a lot in the culture there, you know. But it produces this oil which is crazy, and if you've ever smelled it isolated, it smells strangely sweet. It's a little bit like bubblegum in a way, but it also is very green at the same time. So I'd always kind of in my head reserved this special spot for, wow, I really want to create something with the smell of marigold. And also it's a really kind of forgotten flower. Like nobody really thinks about the smell of marigold. It tends to be a little bit medicinal smelling, and you know, they're kind of like the poor cousins in the flower family, you know, which
apparently bugs hate it.
Yeah, exactly. It's used as an insecticide sometimes. But I like the idea of giving it this sort of mystical quality by mixing it with incense, and that was part of the idea. But in doing so, it became a really dark fragrance. Like it really got very dark, which I liked a lot. And I decided to kind of go deeper into that and let it become more of this kind of sort of primordial mix of stuff, if you will. And I enjoyed the process a lot. Getting the marigold accord was tricky because, you know, that's the case where, you know, actually you can't use a ton of actual marigold or tagette accord, because that is a skin sensitizer. So you can use just a scant amount. So I mixed it in with another very similar plant called calendula, which has a very similar smell, and built an accord of marigold around that, which took some time, definitely. And making an incense accord in fragrance is actually a lot trickier than you think. There's a few aroma chems, and there's some natural things that provide smokiness, but to get that really good incensey smell is hard. It's hard to do, you know, without it just going to pure smoke, which I don't want. You know, that wasn't really what I wanted to do here. I didn't want it to be like just like a barbecue kind of smell, you know.
No, it's definitely not that. Is there cumin in this?
Yes, there is. There is cumin in that.
Yeah, because I got when especially in the first like half an hour, a lot of cumin and that smokiness just with the you know, woody notes, and almost like there was a little bit of an oud accord used here, but I don't think there is one listed, but a little bit like the woody notes could give off this oud-like smell. I mean, this could easily be, you mentioned Serge Lutens, the way he does his cedar and his kind of spices, you know, this is in that. I think that's why it's my favorite, even though there's a lot of floral notes in here. I like the texture of this fragrance a lot. Like you mentioned it being like maybe really thick and maybe like heliotrope or something adds to that Play-Doh-y texture, but this is kind of the sleeper for me. I really enjoyed this one.
Oh, nice.
So very well done there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Surprised that doesn't get more love in the fragrance community. I think that's something that a lot of frag heads would like. It's bold.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is there anything else on Serin that you want to talk about before we move on to the next one?
Well, one thing that is interesting, which I was happy about. So there was for a while in New York, the shop. Sorry. Sorry, I'm completely blanking on the name now. So there was this great boutique in Brooklyn, which went out of business like shortly before the pandemic, and then they've sort of built themselves up again as an online presence. But they were a really great boutique. They took me on for about a year and a half, and it was really, really nice to actually debut Serin there as a fragrance, which was great. And that's one really great memory I have of the perfume. So it was really nice to actually have a sort of an official sort of New York opening for that perfume. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, it had a glamorous entree into the world. So
that's good stuff. Yeah.
That's very cool.
What about Selperniku? So this is the last one that I ended up actually getting to know, and this is your take on a gourmand, if you want to call it that, I guess, because it's got a lot of a lot of gourmand notes, right?
It does, yeah. So there was something very interesting about Selperniku that I'll tell you. Two interesting facts, and something I wanted to show you as well too. So one was that I created that after I made Eiderantler. And so the order of the first three perfumes were Smolderose, Eiderantler, and then Selperniku. And someone had told me, I conferred with a very good friend of mine who is an art director out in San Francisco, and he said, I asked him for a couple of thoughts about, I need some advice about different things I should do. And he said, well, you know what, go out of the gate with 3 fragrances. And I was like, well, I have 2. He said, make a third one, just make a third one. And so I was really kind of frustrated because I thought, oh my God, at the rate that I go, it'll take me 3 months to do this, if that, right? So I gave myself a project and I said, John, you have 2 weeks to make a perfume, 2 weeks. And when I give myself directions like that, I totally see it through. Like I'm very directed and self-directed in that way. So with a deadline like that, I just busted ass and I just worked like night and day to get this finished. And the other part about it that was important is it had to be absolutely different from Eiderantler. So I was going to work at the complete opposite. So Eiderantler was like bristly, green, sharp, everything. This was going to be smooth, a little bit more citrusy, very buttery, creamy. It was going to be absolute opposite end of the spectrum, completely opposite end. And I only had 2 weeks to make it. So it was it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But I tell you, giving myself that deadline was genius, because I felt like I had to use every skill I had, and I had to work. You know, when you have a deadline, it just absolutely motivates you so much more. Instead of just like stumbling around and saying, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. This really pushed me to be much more directed. And so that's how that came about. And I wanted to tell you one of the things that kind of influenced me as I was, I always think of these sort of visual components. And this really strong memory I had as I was making that, I suddenly had this sort of flash. You know how you get this sudden picture of your head about something from your past? And I remember when I was in college, I took a trip to Spain, and I was like poor and just like barely getting by. But this friend was like, hey, you want to go to Spain? And I was like, all right, I'll scrape up some money and I'll go. And I remember I bought a box of soap from a department store, and there was this picture on it of somebody from Europe, their depiction of what the sort of Arabian landscape would have looked like. And I tracked it down, and I thought, yes, that's what I remember. And it had a big effect on the artwork that I made. So it's from Marugia, and it was this now discontinued beautiful fragrance. And what was a box of soap called Maderas de Oriente. And I'll try to get this so you can see it, but it had this absolutely incredible sort of like very distant, sort of this huge spire here and this like very strange little moon up in the top, and this is this huge blue, deep blue sky in the background. And this image stayed with me. Yeah, it's incredible. And this thing stayed with me for so long in my life. And I thought someday this is going to like figure into something that I make or design, you know? And so this was the inspiration for the artwork for Selperniku. Yeah, it's an absolutely gorgeous object. It's very hard to find these nowadays. And there's still this incredible smell. It's a sandalwood-based soap and fragrance.
Oh, beautiful.
If you can ever find Madera Se Oriente, grab it, man. Absolutely grab it.
I'll put it on the list. Absolutely. Yeah, that's good stuff. I really enjoyed the artworks that you did. Like this particular one reminded me of, you know, many people know I was born in Jordan, and I remember my mother picked up some tricks from my father's aunts, which used to put like this yogurt and like mask on their face to keep the skin like healthy, you know? And it almost looks like her face has a little bit of either a shadow or a little bit of that buttery, creamy look. And also on her hands. And since this kind of the star of the show to me is almost this like orris butter like smell. I mean, you have butter, but it smelled almost like this orris butter, you know, type note. And seeing the artwork and kind of the smell merging together was really cool. I enjoyed this one because it was unsweet. So a lot of gourmands I kind of struggle with, but this one had all these interesting notes that you usually don't see, like milk and butter and salt and, you know, fruits and stuff like that blended together, and it wasn't sweet. And so because of that, it's kind of like, you know, I would hardly ever reach for a gourmand, but if I decided I was going to wear one, it would probably be something unsweet like this, which is, I can imagine it being very hard to do an unsweet gourmand, because most gourmands, they just naturally want them to be, you know, sweet apple pie or, you know, ice cream or, you know, whatever crazy things the brands are doing nowadays. So that was what kind of struck me about Selperniku.
Oh, very cool. Very nice.
Any final last thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would only say that what was sort of interesting to me about that too is I was intrigued by what I sometimes refer to as sort of ghost notes, which is like notes that are not really direct but are sort of implied, like something like salt. Like salt doesn't on its own really have a smell. You know, we there's a mineral smell, which you kind of have some nuances of that, which is similar to our sense of salt. But but it's the first time I noticed that, you know, saltiness is more of a feel, and it's more of a kind of a temperature. It's a lot of these other things. But I think that you get it's the first time that I realized, like, wow, okay, salt is part of this fragrance, although I didn't deliberately create a salt accord in it. There isn't really a salt smell, but you start to understand why there is this sort of creative license sometimes in listing accords out, because you can create a sensation of something without necessarily creating a distinct smell of something in a perfume.
Yes.
So that was an important thing that I learned about through making that composition, I would say. There.
Yep. I agree. That's something that, you know, I learned as well along the way in kind of the journey. Jean-Claude Elena was a master of doing that. You know, like he put out Rose and Queer from Frederic Malle, and I don't think there's any rose, and I don't think there's any queer in there, or if there is, there's very little, you know. And so I think that maybe magician, that shadow hand, that sleight of hand, whatever you want to call it, is maybe part of the perfumer's job to make you smell something that isn't there, or make you think you're smelling something that isn't there. You know, that's part of I think that's part of it as well. That's part of the art of it. And I'm sure being the artist and writer, you can definitely appreciate that side of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let me ask you this question before we go to the next one, just real quick. So now that you've been a brand for 7 years, what, you know, the lessons or the person that you are today, how is the John Biebel that we're talking to now different from the John Biebel that was just writing for Fragrantica before January Scent Project came about?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, I'd say that's a tough one. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot, no question. Definitely learned a lot. I think the what I like, and I guess it really hasn't changed, which something that stayed the same, is that I still really like smelling perfume, and I probably wear it less. Like I'm not nearly as like, oh my God, I have to get up and I've got to like douse myself in perfume. Like I'm not nearly that, because I actually have to be in it. I would actually think you're kind of the same, where you need to be a little discerning about what you wear, because you might, like, maybe you're going to do a video about something. So you need to like almost strategically wear something, because you may be doing some media involving the fragrance. And like, I'll sometimes say, okay, well, you know what? I can't wear that today, even though I want to, because I actually have to write about this, or I have to sample something. You know what I mean? So I have to be very like thoughtful about what I wear. So for me to just have like a free day to wear whatever I want, that's a bit of a luxury these days. So that's a little different, but I still like reading about perfume. I like watching videos. I like seeing that, new releases still intrigue me. And I think, oh, wow, this is cool. Somebody's doing something new. So I still think there's a lot of room for creativity. I'd say from the perfuming point of view, I've definitely learned a lot of, a lot about the business, but I'd say it more from many different angles. Like there's sort of the small scale business parts. There are the larger scale that I've learned from, perfumers in the industry, from people I know in the industry. And I would say that I'm not cynical about, like, I've noticed some people get really cynical about the perfume industry, or they think like, oh, they do this for this reason, or they're doing sleight of hand, or they're doing this. And I'm like, I'm sure that people do things in order to, kind of make money and whatnot in order to keep themselves afloat. But I do think that ultimately they are sort of creating products that they want people to enjoy and buy and all that. So I think, it's okay. And I don't think there's a lot of conspiracy there. I think it's just, it is a business. And I think that there's room for people to be creative within business. But I also think that, you need to make certain decisions that will help sort of move you forward. And, I think a good creative person who wants to release stuff to the world is also going to learn ways to do that will benefit everybody. Like it doesn't have to be a us or them situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And interesting that Adam's question or answer or comment is highlighted, because he's basically the reason I asked that question during our live stream. He mentioned his journey of kind of becoming a distiller and then becoming a perfumer, and then kind of looking back on the perfumes he's creating through the eyes of, distillation. Is there, lessons or experiences that you've kind of come across working with these ingredients that now maybe you look at something different, maybe you look at like an accord, or, the creation of one of your fragrances different now than when you first started?
Yeah, I definitely, in that case. By the way, this is really kind, Adam. Thank you so much. I appreciate this comment very much. It's really nice. Yeah, one thing I've definitely learned is that I started off making extremely complicated formulas, very complicated formulas, and to the point of actually thinking that it was really cool to make complicated formulas, that I was somehow, elevating or sort of putting my, like, whoa, look at how many ingredients I put into this. That's really cool. Then the next time I had to make it, I would dread making the next batch. And then the third time, fourth time I'd have to make it, I would dread it even more. And I thought, it really sucks to make a complicated perfume. But that, so I mean, that's my own personal thing. But actually, what I did realize is that every time it's a good parallel to that is I once explained it to someone else this way. So imagine, sometimes you take a kid into an ice cream store, and they find out that you can get like a million different sort of toppings or additives put on top of a sundae, but they don't realize there's only like 2 inches of room for those toppings, right? So they give you this idea that if you get 10 different toppings, that you're going to get like 10 inches of stuff. But no, you still only have 10 inches of space, just like there's only X amount of space available in the bottle to put things in. So the more stuff you add into a perfume, that means everything else gets diluted. So having more things in a fragrance does not necessarily mean that you're actually making a better perfume or a more complex perfume. You're just making a more complicated perfume. So that's a really, really important lesson that I learned initially, is that I threw in things almost purposefully, kind of making things more complex, only later to realize, no, you don't need to sort of flex like that. You don't need to sort of, impress the world with all of these different things. It can actually be far more simple. Do I always follow that? No, but I've noticed that you can tell a big story with a simpler formula.
Yeah. I think Edmond Roudnitska was a big fan of that. I think he said something like, someone can only smell 3 or 4, notes at once anyways. So whenever you just pile it on, it kind of gets lost in translation sometimes. But yeah, that's an interesting quote. Thank you for sharing that. That's good stuff. All right, let's talk about your first one. I guess we should have gone in order, but let's talk about Smolder Rose. This was the one where you kind of set that challenge for yourself to make a fragrance, and then you finally did. This was the very first one of the bunch, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was indeed.
So tell us a little bit about Smolder, because I think this, if I was gonna pick one to own, it would either be probably this or maybe Serin or Vaporocindro are kind of the 3 in my head. But Smolder Rose is a very interesting rose. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So I was, I really had, I mentioned before the whole notion of smoke. I became really smitten by the notion and smell of smoke and perfume. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. Because, when I grew up, there weren't very many smoky perfumes. And I love the smell of smoke. And there's also a lot of interesting psychological theory about smoke and the smell of smoke. And it tends to be both, it tends to wake us up, because if you go into really deep lizard brain stuff, it's both an attractor, because it's the smell of like sort of campfire, but it's something that is on fire. So we're both repelled, and it's danger and it's comfort at the same time. So that's why we have almost this like weird push and pull, reflection on the smell of smoke.
Never thought of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, and of course we don't really have data to back that up, but that's what we can more or less surmise from our sort of guttural reactions to it. So it's always very arresting smell, and I like the idea of this very kind of literal sense of opposites and putting them together. And that might be one of the themes in some of my work, is I do like to take these sort of disparate things and sort of force them into a conversation. In this case was a flower and a smoky smell. And it wasn't necessarily going to be rose at first. I was experimenting with a few other things, and at first it was going to be like neroli or orange flower, and that didn't work out so well. And it just smelled literally like a burning flower. But in this case, I liked the idea of using rose, because rose is really adaptable, and you can sort of music in many different. It can mix around many different things. And along the way, I think the thing that sort of bound the two together was, certainly saffron is a really good sort of bridge between smoke and rose. And then, of course, I had found these interesting distillates, and that distillate of seashell and the Choya it's such a peculiar smell, which lends that really distinct sort of slightly saline kind of burning smell that I was so drawn to, and I was determined to use it in some way. I really was. I thought, this is so peculiar, but I really, really want to use it. I managed to use it in a way that I thought was effective. It took some time. This was my first one. When I mentioned that sort of learning curve where, someone who's been to an academic school is going to arrive at something quicker. This was, out of my first fragrance, this took a while. This was a good 9 months of work for me to get to that point.
That saffron with the rose and the Choya Naka, which is the roasted seashells, it gives it. I think in the review I mentioned that you could almost imagine like the wave kind of coming in and out, and this guy's like laying on a beach right here because the seashells give it almost this ambergris like sparkle,
Yeah,
like but it also has that distinct quality. I really like the saline description. There is definitely something. Yeah, there definitely is. This is a very interesting rose, and if I didn't have a million rose fragrances, this easily could be full bottle worthy. It's very. I don't think I've smelled a rose that's exactly like that. It's unique, which is hard to say about a rose because how many roses have been done, right? There's been a million rose fragrances.
Yeah, totally.
Well, good stuff. I appreciate you talking a little bit about it.
Absolutely.
So the next one on the list you mentioned was Eiderantler, right?
Yes.
That was the one that came after Smolder Rose.
The one you don't like.
This one I struggled with a little bit.
No, it's totally
you call it an Ivy Fougere.
Indeed, yes. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Eiderantler.
Sure. So this was this is by far, this remains the most complicated formula. And the one that I mentioned before will probably be the first to get reformulated. So because of the difficulty in getting some of the natural ingredients in there, but it's it has a lot of stuff in it. And for me, it was also a technical exercise in just sort of learning the complexity of, how to make a fougere. And what I do like about the fougere as a kind of fragrance is that it really is, there is sort of this eureka moment when you add the right things together and suddenly, bam, you've got a fougere in front of you. And it really does transcend its parts, which is kind of a beautiful moment. And it took a while to get those proportions correct. And then finally I thought, oh my, and I remember the moment because when I smelled it, I said, I've just made Old Spice, which literally happened. And I didn't set out to make Old Spice. Now, immediately I was kind of horrified because I was like, I don't want to make Old Spice, but I really had made a sort of Old Spice type of smell. And then, of course, I kept working from there. But I did want to make something green, and I wanted to make, and this is going to tell you something kind of interesting about my beginnings. When I very first started out making perfume, I made a very strategic error, which was I said, oh, I kind of like green perfumes. Let me start off with green scents. That should be something easy to do. That's like the worst place to start as a perfume. Right. The worst place, because those are all synthetic. Like there's nothing, and there's so many. And the names of the components that you use are completely, like, absolutely, they're all straight chemical names. Like they're not friendly to remember,
Yes.
Really hard to know, so it's the worst place to start. And so I got all of these, like, green synthetic components, and they smell awful. Some of them smell terrible in their regular strength. Like you have to really dilute these to smell even slightly palatable, and so I got a pretty thorough education on green scents, like very early on, which was not very usable to me. But I said, I really want to use this knowledge at some part in the future. So I did save it. And as I was building this fougere, I thought, well, let me make it greener. And I did have this, since a young kid, I had this smell of ivy in my head. We had ivy growing everywhere. And to me, it has a particular smell. It's a kind of a musty, sort of it's a very musty, slightly like a muskmelon kind of a smell to it, almost like a dusty kind of smell. And I wanted to build that into this and yet still keep it sort of bracing, sort of sharp. And that was really the goal. And to make this as sort of aftershavey in a way, again, thinking a little bit of my father in a way when I was building it. Yeah.
Yeah, there is when you say aftershave, there is a little bit of that, skin bracer type feel, a little bit of that mossy. What are some of your favorite fougères from the past, just out of curiosity?
I mean, gosh, that's a tough one. What are some of my favorite fougères? I would say, actually, when they brought back to life Fougère Royale, I got, I had just one of the old, like, Menin Oh yeah, Paco Rabanne's amazing. Yeah, I love Paco Rabanne. That's glorious stuff. That's a beautiful fougere, actually.
Oh yeah, this
yeah,
is my old man's signature scent.
It's a good one, and it has that really nice citrus in the beginning too, which I love. That's a really good one. I mean, I'd say like I really like Fougere Royale a lot. I think that's a great one. And I had an old bottle of a tin canister of the powder of the original Fougere Royale, which still had a lot of fragrance left in it, which was nice. And I used to use that as a kind of reference, like, that's kind of sort of what the fragrance smelled like. But I like that. I don't know if I kind of keep wanting, it's really a citrus fragrance, but I keep wanting to go back to Eau Sauvage. It's not really a true fougere, but it's sort of more in that sort of aftershave kind of area. But like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some others that have really, I'll have to come back to you on that one. Nothing's coming.
All right, that'll be a fun little exercise. Does champa leaf smell different from the champaca flower? I assume it does. Yeah.
Yeah, they're similar. They're quite similar, but it's a little greener. It's a little less sweet, basically, than the flower. So
it adds that green touch you were trying to go for here.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful smell.
This is one that might have to grow on me.
Okay.
It's listed as an ivy fougere. There's an ivy note. Interestingly enough, if you're a fan of ivy, there's an ivy note in a fragrance called Luciano Pavarotti from the 1990s.
I've actually never smelled that.
I'll send you a sample of this.
Oh, all right.
Sample. It is a must sniff. It's so good. It's full bottle worthy. It's backup bottle worthy, actually. It may even be the best celebrity fragrance of all time.
No way. You're serious, really?
Yes, it's fantastic.
Oh, that's wild, man.
There's an ivy note in there. There's a patchouli note in there. There's a Russian leather note in there. I think you would dig it.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really nice. Yeah, that really does.
So before we get to the next one, what's your best selling? Do you have a best selling fragrance, and do you have a fragrance that maybe you're like most proud of?
Yeah, hands down, without any question whatsoever, Burvuvu outsells everything. It sells like crazy, which I don't even have to look at any spreadsheets for that. So I think it's Burvuvu, Smolderose, and then I'm not sure the third, but those two sell. Yeah, they outsell a lot of the other ones. Favorite? Oh God, wow, that's a tough one. Oh boy, favorite. See, you'll find this funny because I sort of am partial a little bit to Horla, and I would say that probably because I worked on it under very strange circumstances. It was I worked on it during the pandemic, and I was really kind of it was very heads down work. It was very solitary work, and for a while all I did was I'd work my full-time gig, get in my car, go to my studio, work in my studio, get in the car, come back. It was this very, and I was working very slowly on the accords. It was based on this kind of a horror short story by Guy de Maupassant called The Horla. And I was finding all these really bizarre parallels between the story and what was happening in general with the pandemic. Like, it's about a ship that's left in quarantine in a harbor, and I was like, whoa, what the hell? That's so weird, because we're all in quarantine in the world. So it sort of started to take on these really strange, very supernatural, otherworldly qualities to me, and I got very much wrapped up in the sort of spell of the whole thing, that it was that it was becoming, art becoming life and all that sort of thing.
Interesting.
Let
me spray it. Let's talk about it. This one didn't take me right away either. This is one of the three that I kind of struggled with. You listed as Milk Almonds Bay Leaf perfume.
Yeah, it's a strange stew of things.
It is a strange stew, isn't it? I don't think you've used milk in a couple of your fragrances now. It's funny too, because I think it was Jean-Claude Elena who said, "Do not put milk in perfume." Which is really funny. It has this camphor smell.
It does, yeah. There's some of the particularly bay leaf and nutmeg, like those they have a really strong, and it's not a, I don't want to use the word camphorous, but it's, you know, when you smell certain spices like bay leaf or nutmeg, it has that kind of, what's the word? I don't have a word for it, but it's they're I think in Indian culture they refer to the cooling spices and the warming spices, and I'm not sure where they fall, but there's that kind of like, it has a hum, like almost got a kind of a quality to it, where they like,
Yes.
yeah, they have a sort of a humming quality to them in a way, which I was really drawn to. And I remember, you know, I have a vision in my head once of this sort of soup cooking on my stove and the steam coming up, and there's was like steam and bay leaves, and there was like that kind of something.
Good
and
image.
Yeah, that, and like this idea of the ship, and all of that was kind of mixing together in my head. And I thought I wanted to capture all of that. The almond accord is also kind of important in there as well too. Yeah, it's sort of a tough one because there's a lot of different parts in there, and I know it's a sort of complicated, slightly odd formula of stuff.
Creamy.
Yeah, very creamy. But I also was trying to, that's probably the one fragrance where I think I was sort of trying to create a very specific mood, where some of the other ones wasn't really trying to capture a mood, because I feel like that's again up to the wearer to kind of figure out for himself, herself, themselves. But I feel kind of, this was a particular mood that interested me, which again, maybe it's because I was using a literary source, and that's the first and I think only time I've done that so far, you know, where something interested me, you know. Why we're current, we can just complain.
Now, would you consider the spices in this a cool or a warm spice fragrance?
They're right on that edge, man. That's the thing, is like I feel like they're right on the edge between the two, because some people have referred to this as kind of a warm fragrance, others have said it's very cool, and I'm still, I put this on, you know, I don't wear a lot of my work that frequently, but when I do, I can't decide myself yet where it lies. Like I think it's a tough one. It's between the two. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I was going to say one more thing. Some people were floating around the idea that because this is a little more perfumey in some ways, and some people were saying that this had shades of like almost a Chanel No. 5-ishness to it. I think because of aldehydes and whatnot, which wasn't my intention. I didn't see. Yeah.
No, I don't see that.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I mean, you know, everyone smells something different, but maybe it's the artwork, but I would probably fall maybe into the cooling camp a little bit. Is there cardamom in here too?
Yes, there is.
So that can be kind of a cooling spice as well. I think when you mix that with the nutmeg, and then, but maybe the warm, cool thing is there's also a coffee note listed. And you know, there's this warmth of coffee if you think about normal, unless you're drinking iced coffee, and then there's this coolness of milk and this creaminess. I mean, I could almost imagine this being the smell of when you literally walked into this ship's like underground deck where they store things, and you go to the room where there's all these crates, you know, that haven't been disturbed, that have been just sitting there in this ancient ship. Right. That's like shipping.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of the things I was really interested in was this notion of you know, in fact, I would love one day to do a fragrance that's just about like age of exploration and like, you know, ships like traveling around and like carrying stuff forever in, you know, in their hulls. And that was something that really affected me, because the ship, which is looming in the harbor, this 5-masted schooner, which keeps infecting this guy's dreams he's having every night, but it's actually this gleaming white ship in the harbor. It has all of these stores on board that are 3-masted schooner, are stuck in there. And I was thinking a lot about like, what does that smell like? What is it in there? You know, it's very interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting story.
Yeah, that's good stuff. No, I appreciate you sharing. This is all great. This is all great. This will be a reference for people wanting to learn more about your work.
Cool.
So
Yeah,
I'm gonna
cool.
save the bestseller for last. Let's talk about Dinudisit, the
Oh,
hardest for me to
Dinudisit.
pronounce. Is it Dinudisit?
It's Dinudisit is the name of it. Yeah.
Dinudisit. Okay.
Dinudisit. It's okay. There's really, I never take offense at any, because some of these are tough words. I know. So.
What was the blend of two words here?
No, this was actually a completely made up word. This is the most
okay.
completely made up word. Yeah. I struggle to create something that reflects. It's going to sound a little strange, but I want a sound that kind of matches what I'm creating in my head. And sometimes they really match up in my head, and I think, oh, this is good. I also want to add an interesting point here. A few perfumers have come up to me and said, John, what a good idea of what you're doing, because they're running into all these legal troubles because they've created a fragrance name that other perfumers have used because it's too common. And they're like, keep making these really weird names that nobody wants because it's keeping you well protected legally. So,
interesting take. That's the business side of it.
I know. It was funny. So this one was interesting to me because it was the first time I'd thought really about narcissus and jonquil and those related plants. And I had gotten, it's probably one of the, and maybe the most expensive material I ever used, which is jonquil absolute. It's very, very expensive. It's sort of like the daffodil flower absolute. And it's so beautiful. I can't even tell you how beautiful this material is. And I was so influenced by this smell. And I wanted to make something. It's sort of like when you get a gemstone and you're like, I got to find a good setting for it. And I chose a setting that was more aquatic because I've always seen those flowers as being kind of, they're like narcissus and daffodil and jonquil and all those. There's something about them that, like, I think they get lost in a lot of settings. Like, you can't put them into anything too heavy. You can't, there's a certain delicacy to them, even though the smell is really ambery and deep. Like, you still want to, put them into something, I think, that won't compete with it. It'll sort of like swim along with it. And I remember thinking of the word swim and I'm like, wait a minute, aquatic. I've never done anything aquatic. And I like the challenge of working with something aquatic. And it was a very intriguing process there. To work with aquatics, and then little notes came in, and I think what the most important note for me was actually adding beeswax in there, because that's a very really curious. It's the most animalic of all the natural materials, I think, aside from being of an actual animal source. And you could say, to a sense, because it does have actual, like, bee legs, like, kind of wandering through it. That is an insect animal part. But to me, this was really about bringing a bunch of stuff together that sort of created a new whole. And, some folks really like that. Some other folks are like, it's really, really off the beaten path. And it's probably the closest I've come to doing, like, within the main line of a sheep, really, I would say an unusual kind of sheep, but
yes, I remember Rachel was a big fan of this one. She really liked it. I can definitely see that sheep red like accord as it dries, because it turns into that mossy oak, oak moss.
Mm-hmm.
There's celery seed note listed in here.
Yeah, and I have a good story about that. So when I was doing some of my initial research, there's a kind of stock trade guide to it's an older book, but you can find it. It's something produced in the very early 80s, but it's a bunch of essays about, perfumers talk about making perfume. And it's a little bit more of a very nerdy book. But there is a famous fragrance maker who, they did not reveal his name, but he created a lot of classic fragrances. And he kind of, on his deathbed, he said that he put a tiny drop of celery seed in every single perfume he made. And I was like, whoa, damn, which was crazy. And I was smelling celery seed, and I was really, and apparently he says that it's like one of these foundational, like, it adds just that little bit of grist to a smooth profile that's necessary. And I thought, all right, I'll take on that challenge. All right, I'll do it. I'll see if I can do something with it. And I did like working with it. And I'll admit, there's another perfume that has celery in it, which is not listed, but it's a little chunk, just a tiny infinitesimal amount that's added in there, just to again add a little bit of subversive grist in there.
Did you use Cologne for the Ocean Accord?
I did not. No, I did not. I used a couple of other things. I find the problem I have with Cologne is that it's not a bad component, but it tends to get really, it has a very melon kind of aspect to it, which I'm not as much of a fan of, because you could push it more in that sort of melon direction. I'm not really a big old fan of the melon smell too much. So, you know, that I decided to, there's another somewhat similar freshy type ingredient that I use, but it's a little bit more just a pure aquatic. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Aquatics are these would be interesting for someone that maybe wants a aquatic that's off the beaten path and doesn't smell like the usual aquatic suspects. Have you ever smelled oh no, I moved everything around. I never remember where anything is now. They're back in boxes. Have you smelled Ocean Rain by Mario Valentino?
No, I have not, actually.
That was the final Edmond Roudnitska fragrance in 1990. I'll make a little list. I'll send you some decants. So we've got Pavarotti,
that would be awesome.
And we've got Ocean Rain. But Ocean Rain is this really strange, almost like you're smelling like, you know, when the oceans were like forming life, you know, this weird like brew of like hydrogen peroxide smells, and it's just it's a very challenging aquatic, and you know how Edmond Roudnitska loves to kind of throw in the animalics in there, and he was at the end of his life, so he didn't give a shit what people thought. He was like, I'm gonna make the fragrance I want to make.
Do it, yeah.
And it's one of the most interesting aquatics, but it's maybe, you know, as far as, and that was a designer though, what's interesting. So, but it's maybe one of the, you know, I would put it in that challenging, almost like Silence the Sea from, from
Strange
yeah,
Love.
Those kind of challenging aquatics. That's kind of the batch, the theme, or the, you know, grouping that I would put. Now I already forgot how to say it, but
Dinudisit. Yeah.
Yes, Dinudisit. And so good stuff. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, sure thing.
Finally, we've got your bestseller, Burvuvu, which I instantly ran to when I got the sample set, because I was like, oh, I got to smell this one everyone's talking about. So tell us a little bit about Burvuvu.
Sure. So what I like about Burvuvu is there's two funny stories about Burvuvu. One is that it's the one perfume I've made that I think is the first. It started off as a purely technical exercise where I'm like, damn, I've started collecting cedars. I really liked cedar, and I don't smell enough cedar-based perfumes, not really good ones. And then it sent me on this sort of wild goose chase. So I'm going to smell every damn cedar I can find. And so I just like hunting for cedars everywhere. And there's a lot of variants on cedar. And what's interesting is even some of my favorite kinds of cedar didn't end up in the perfume, because, you know, not everything you want to put in a fragrance can end up there because it may not smell right, you know? So like, I think one of my favorites is Himalayan cedar, which is a very funky cedar. In fact, it shares some of the smell of oud, like a kind of animalic type of smell in some ways. And so I wanted to make a very cedar-based fragrance, but I kind of came to this point when I was working on it initially, is that it could either go really dry or really kind of damp. And I thought, well, you know, dry is sort of where almost people would almost expect me to go. And I thought, why don't I try to do something that's damp and actually go more like the stuff that's like on the forest floor, like those years and years and years of leaves that are just like piled up on top of each other. And that's where I decided to go. And once I made that decision, it became really interesting, and the perfume took a very different direction. And that's where I added in, like, I experimented with the mushroom accord, and I decided to go for a very wet sort of rose, this very dark red, wet kind of a damp rose. Also I think there's a small bit of honey in there to kind of like just add a small bit of sweetness in there. And that's the first perfume I ever used castoreum, and it's not a real castoreum, it's a reconstruction of castoreum. I did use a real castoreum in a fragrance, a limited edition I made this past year. But it's funny what you say, though, because there's some folks who thought that the fragrance was, some people who consider it like, some people say it's too woodsy, it's too dark and whatever. But I do know what you mean. There were versions of Burvuvu that were much more animalic and much more like, which are probably what you may have wanted.
Yes. Yeah, I'm probably in the rare camp where I was like, turn the castoreum up, baby. But most people, it's funny because when I watched reviews of this, they're like, yes, it's animalic, but don't worry, it's not too much, And I'm kind of in the other camp. I'm like, let's. I have the Russian Atom addiction sickness where I always want more. I want more animalics, and I really think this is one of the best cedar fragrances I've smelled. But I don't know if I would. I think I would like. I just want the animal. If you made a bespoke fragrance for me, I would tell you to amp that castoreum up in Burvuvu. But this is really good stuff that. You sent me some cedars. Actually, I'm going to grab them real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today,
sure.
And one was a.
Yeah, the only one to be careful with the red cedar, because that stuff can really stain. Just to let you know, right? That's
take a look at that.
And I'm really curious for you to give the smell to both of these, because you'll see. I'm sorry, you go ahead if you wanted to put the other one out there.
No, the other one was Texas cedar, right?
Right. Yeah.
Excellent.
What I think you'll find interesting, the Texas cedar, I think, is going to meet your expectations of like a traditional kind of pencil shavings type cedar. And the red cedar is very strange and interesting. Like, to me, it smells a little bit like roast beef, to be frank.
Really?
Yes. I mean, you could say you're crazy, John. It doesn't smell anything like roast beef, but I think it does. Not this one. This one is the more traditional.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
I
more
like that pencil shaving note sometimes.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that the pencil shaving note was so surreal at one point that I almost smelled like an eraser from the pencil, like when you're a little kid,
Yeah. Which is really funny. Actually, that cracks me up, that whole, when you're saying it's like the pencil and the eraser. I thought that was pretty novel. Pretty novel, yeah.
Oh, it's so spicy.
I know, right? It's really unusual, isn't it? Like, to me, this has a very meaty quality to it.
I get what you're saying. I don't know if I would have thought roast beef, but now that you planted that seed, I don't know if I'll be able to unsmell it. I'm going to put this on skin one day before bed.
Yeah, what I would tell you, just like if you have just a little like baby oil or something, mix, like first put a little oil and then put a drop in, just so it doesn't completely stain your skin. Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty potent stuff. Yeah. But
that's awesome. So I actually starred some comments. So you want to do some some questions from the audience?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Let's see what we got here.
What do we have?
So the first one is from Dushan, and he says, John, which fragrance from the past is the one that you would like to see yourself as the creator of?
Wow, man.
We got knowledgeable watchers here, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you sure do. No, it's a great question. So there's a couple, I'll say a couple that come to mind that are really, that sort of stand out in my head as just brilliant perfumes, right? So one, there's a lot of the olds from Caron, the House of Caron, that are just like amazing. And one is like Narcisse Noir is it whenever, people have asked me like, well, what does Narcissus smell like? I always say, smell this, like smell Narcisse Noir. This is
1960.
Yeah, this is what a narcissus flower smells like. This is what it should smell like in perfume, and it's it's sort of that really perfect example of a hypnotic floral smell, dark hypnotic floral smell that you can see it, like people wafting it and like, literally drawing, like a guy, like, in a trance, across the room or something. Like, it could totally see that happening. It's that alluring. It's not even a pretty smell. It's actually, it's sort of, you can almost smell the dirt along with the flowers that it's growing in all together in one thing. It's that kind of like earthy, you're smelling the whole, everything around it, the air around it, the leaves, the dirt, and I love that perfume. I think it's a beautiful creation. So that's something takes a lot of genius to make something like that. Also, it's funny when you get asked these direct questions and you panic. You're like, "What?" there was a fragrance. This is an interesting one. So there's a fragrance made by florists. Here's the thing: is it's not a fragrance anymore, but it was at one time. They have and I think it's just called geranium, and it was at one point a perfume. Now it's only available as a soap and as a bath oil. And some people actually just put the bath oil on their skin. And I think it's just called geranium. And this is one of the most amazing kind of geranium / rose geranium smells you've ever smelled. And it also is a little bit earthy. And I smelled it first at the florist boutique in London. And I was just blown away by this stuff, and just shockingly good. And I thought, God, if I would love to have smelled that original fragrance, and would love to have made it. And I'm really fascinated by the smell of geraniums. That's another really good one. And kind of reaching back a little more here, kind of thinking through. I think another really big fragrance for me is Chanel Pour Monsieur. I think is a really fantastic fragrance. I don't think it's one of those that like was groundbreaking or like unbelievably good, but I have such fond memories of it, and it does what it does so well that I would love to make something that's just that good, just plain good and functional and great on many levels. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Now, Narcissus Noir and Geranium are two kind of very off the beaten path, I would say, picks. Are those perfumes that you just like, you really admire the fragrance itself, or is that like your favorite? Is that like, if you had to pick like fragrances to wear, are those the kind of things that you would like to wear yourself, or you just kind of admire the creation, the creative?
I think I admired the creative, the difficulty that would have taken to make such things. That's probably, and I should set that aside and say, there are certain perfumes that you marvel at the technical expertise that had to go into making it, because some things just, and there's some perfumes I wear that are great, but I also, as you the longer you work in perfume, you start to figure out how certain things were made. And like a favorite contemporary perfume I really like is the Dior Privé Oud Ispahan. It's a really great perfume.
Yeah.
But I kind of know a little more about how it was made. Like I know one of the bases that's involved in making it, which I still love Oud Ispahan. I love that stuff, and it's one of the most powerful. I think it's maybe the most powerful fragrance in my cabinet back here. But I also know that this base involved in it is like a good 50% of the perfume. And now that I own a bottle of the base, when I open it, I'm like, oh, that's Oud Ispahan right there. And it kind of took away some of my
magic.
Yeah, a little bit of the magic went away. Yeah, tiny bit of the magic. So I guess, at one point in time I thought, God, if I only knew how they made Oud Ispahan, but now, I do a little. So I would say that the technical expertise it takes to make certain things impresses the hell out of me. But I will wear some things where I also think like, damn, that's a great perfume. And I would love, it would be great to make even a chunk of that. But some things are, there are some perfumes that really have almost like an alchemical kind of sheen to it, where they added things in there. And I don't know how it was made. I just don't know how they arrived at where they are. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Where do you fall on the oud debate as far as, houses like Dior using the word oud when there's probably not a drop of real oud in there? Do you think that's kind of like a little bit of a ethical,
Is there an
I mean,
ethical-
because they've made
Yeah.
billions of dollars. The oud industry is huge, right?
You're right.
And, they're presenting something as a product, but there's really not a lot of those houses. They're not using real oud, like Russian Atom, for example. Or if you're
Of
using
course,
real
of
oud, I
course.
mean, do you take offense to them using the word oud?
I
in
don't
their-
personally, I don't personally take offense to it. No, I think, how can I explain it? In the sense that, like, I do, let me see, this is a tough one because I mean, there's not a lot that offends me, to be honest. So that's kind of a tough
Right.
question. But to your point though, does it devalue what real oud is? Yeah, it probably is a little bit, and that's unfortunate. I think I'm, because of some of the knowledge I just have from writing a lot about perfume, I've sort of learned that many of the things that go into perfume, oud included, are often recreated as accords, and there's some perfumes that have probably very little naturals in them, except for the less expensive naturals, such as, patchouli is not that expensive, vetiver isn't very expensive, so some of those are easier to put into fragrances. So I guess I have some problems where it's just bandied about, like, anything, and yet at the same time you have an audience of perfume wearers that are so educated right now, probably more than they've ever been in their whole life, and they can look up any of these things online, any number of sources. So I'm kind of weighing that against, we do live in this. I mean, my smartphone is probably the fastest computer I've ever had. So I'm not sure if I could say that the audiences can't inform themselves very quickly if they need to. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence there, and I think ultimately, people who are curious about oud, like I became, and I started to smell stuff, I was like, oh my god, okay, so that's what real oud is, and that's why it's so damn expensive, and so I think people will eventually find their way there, and maybe it's good that real oud is what it is, and sort of ouds used in more mainstream perfumes is what it is, and maybe it should have an asterisk next to it. It would probably help. Probably.
Have you smelled that black oud or whatever that ingredient is on its own?
Oh, you mean like some of the different, like, oud replacer? There's a few. In fact, there's more and more that are coming out now, and they're pretty common. There's like there's that agarwood replacer. In fact, they recently renamed it to, I think it's called, for a while it was called like oud synth, and that was I don't know if was that a Robertet or a Firmenich. I can't remember who makes that, which wasn't too bad, and actually kind of created a general sense of oud without it being oud. And I think there may have even been some like immature, non-diseased agarwood in it, like, so agarwood essentially, and you will find there's some real agarwood in some oud perfumes, but it's not like the diseased agarwood like real, like oud is. So that may be the loophole that some people are kind of getting lost in. Then you have some of these hybrids, like, for example, Firmenich has some really nice sort of plantation oud, which is like very responsibly farmed and all of that, which is not bad, and it's definitely, it's still expensive too. This is pretty pricey stuff, but it's sort of, they do have pretty high controls over, like, when they can harvest it and all of this stuff, and they're able to produce it in replicable amounts. So at a fairly, it's not the kind of oud that you'll find from people like Adam here or something like that. Not that kind of incredible quality, but like a quality that's a little higher. So I don't know who's using those ouds. I'd say, like, maybe for some of the really high level Guerlain, they might be using some of those type of ouds and a couple of other things. I mean, you won't find it in like Petite Robe Noir or something like that, but
No.
or like Homme Ideal or something, you know. But you know, so I think there are different entry points into that as well, and it's probably a pretty complex conversation, some of which I really don't know which houses are using what, but yeah, Dior Privé,
Yeah. I'd be
probably.
shocked if there's any real oud in there, but you never know. I mean,
Surprised.
Adam sent me some Plantation Oud, interestingly enough,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you watched all 3 of our interviews, but
Not all 3. I did see 2, the first 2, I want to say.
yeah, so
Maybe I
one
have.
of them we went through all of the ingredients that he sent me one by one, and we talked about all of them, and
Mhm.
one of the ingredients or set of ingredients was a couple Plantation Ouds, and I was
Mhm.
actually really surprised with the quality. You
Yeah.
know, some people really talk bad about the Plantation Oud, but and they think that you have to find some wild tree that's been in the jungle for 100 years, and
Right, sunk
you
under
know,
the mud and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. It has to be a centennial grandmother tree and all this stuff. But man, those Plantation Ouds he sent me were really actually pretty impressive. I think that
Yeah.
gives a lot of hope for you know, what
Yeah.
the future of real oud holds, because I
Yeah.
mean there's only so many rare wild trees left that people are going to be able to find. You know,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
the numbers game. So we
Right.
need the Plantation Ouds, I guess, to some extent. So
Right. Yeah.
interesting
Agreed.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Rachel, who I'm sure you know very well. She says, John,
Yeah.
your fragrances are, to my experience, quite dense, luxurious, and
Oh,
complex.
that's
Can
very
you
nice.
talk a bit about your overall style, how you would describe it? Would you agree with the density I described?
Yeah. First of all, I would, and I think it's interesting, you know, when Ramsey, when you asked me about like who do I, who do I admire as perfumers, I was thinking of, you know, kind of some pretty perfumers who work with very dense kind of profiles as well too. So I think I have, I've liked making kind of dense perfumes, and I think part of it was just that I had this idea in my head, and I think it's still true. Although there are times when I think like, John, just make something really like vapory and light, and kind of, you know, like something a quick refresher you can put on during the day, which I might get there. Um, but I kind of have this idea of, you know, wanting to create stuff that is it might sound funny, but I think people should get a certain value for what they spend in a way. Like I actually wanted you to feel that you're getting a certain thing for what you are actually spending your money on. And part of that is a rich perfume experience. And that doesn't mean to say that light perfumes don't have their place. Like I love certain really light perfumes a lot, particularly things you can kind of wear and then put something else on later. But I think there's a kind of, I don't want to use necessarily the word voluptuous, but a certain like, density and richness of character that's always appealed to me about fragrances. And I think you can control the volume really about like how often you spray, just spraying a little part of the body or something. And I think it has been part of the style of what I do. And we'll see as time goes on if I keep working that way, or if I throw in some lighter things, if I make some really dark things as well too. I've been intrigued by this idea of the darker Burvuvu now at some point. Someone once said like Burvuvu could use a flanker at some point, maybe, but maybe that would be my first flanker. But
That would be very interesting.
it would be.
That's good stuff. For Vuvu Extreme, if you let the mainstream folks name your fragrances, it would be for Vuvu Eau de Parfum Intense Extreme. You know?
Right, exactly. Right, yeah.
And then she follows up saying, "Would you be willing to talk about your Narcissus Accord in Dinudisit? I find it extraordinary and love to know more." I think you talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah. So just to recap a bit and add some more context, like it's really a sort of Narcissus and jonquil together, and there's a pretty healthy dose of jonquil in there, and jonquil is and I'm not sure, Rachel, if you've ever smelled jonquil Absolute, but it is just an absolutely gorgeous rare raw material, fairly rare material, and it has a a strange complexity that I don't think any other material I've ever smelled has. It's just beautiful, and I would love to someday maybe explore like a like kind of an amber narcisse kind of a fragrance that's like down the line, but that would be amazing because there's a lot of ambery qualities to that. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a rich flower that's also sort of delicate, and that contradiction built in there, it just fascinates me totally.
Very interesting. And then Rachel, again, as people who like to think about and talk about perfumes, do you have any advice for us when considering experiencing fragrances that have more complex artistic depth than many commercial scents?
It's curious about that. I feel that it's a great question, and I would say what I like about perfume and what I like about enjoying perfume and wearing it, and this is why actually I keep writing for Fragrantica, and it's important to me that I maintain it, is that you can enter at any level you want, right? There's no rule book about how you can do it. You can you can enter it as high a level as you want. You can just say, hey, I like to wear this every day, or it can be something that it has a lot of artistic depth to of experience for you. What I tend to think of is that every perfume has potential to have a lot of import from a narrative point of view, artistic point of view, like whatever you choose. And it can be that for you, from your own interpretation. It can be based on whatever the stuff that you read about a fragrance, in your research. It can be what other people say about a fragrance or whatever. It can also be like a stepping stone toward another experience that you have. But I guess with maybe richer fragrances or fragrances that have a bigger backstory, one of the things I like to do is I like to look at one facet of it, and I kind of just like, dip myself deeper into that one factoid, if it's like just the name or one ingredient that's used or something about the perfumer. And then I kind of really go deep on that. And then if I want to go further, more horizontal, I can, or I can just sort of enjoy that and then slowly learn more about what's there. For instance, right now I'm reading a lot about M7 and that fragrance, and writing about that. And because for some reason it just completely off my radar, and I realized, God, there's a lot to write about M7. There's a ton of stuff to write about M7.
Have you smelled it?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And you've got one of the great original bottles there. That's classic.
Do you think this is the first Western oud fragrance, or do you think the rumors about Balenciaga Pour Homme having oud in them are true?
Is that the? How interesting. Well, I will say this is now going to be part of that. I had been part of a live stream in which it was said that there is rumors that Balenciaga Pour Homme was actually the one. I cannot say. I wouldn't say it's impossible that Balenciaga Pour Homme could have been that. I don't know.
There's a professor who gave a speech at a conference, and he's a perfume history guy, so I don't think he would just make this up. I don't know where his source is, though, but he claims that Balenciaga Pour Homme actually has oud in the base. That they didn't list it as a note, but it's the first Western, because in the Middle East, in the Arabic world, they've been using oud for thousands of years, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so it's really just the first Western perfume. Is it this? Is it M7? Is it actually somebody? I think Armando mentioned that there was a fragrance from I forget the house, but the name of the fragrance was called Highness Oud. And Highness Oud was actually Oud for Highness from Kriegler, and it actually came out
yes.
So it came out in 2010, but it was created for King Hussein of Jordan.
Yes.
Like 35 years ago or something, like way back in the day.
Yes.
And that technically that's the first Western oud.
That would not surprise me because Kriegler is a very strange little house. They
Yes.
they have a couple of that's actually amazing because good fur is. Have you ever smelled good fur?
I've never smelled a Kriegler.
Oh my God. Well, it's probably better that you don't because they're so expensive. They're so expensive that if you like one of them, you're going to just, I mean, I think Oud for Highness costs, what is it, like $700 or $800 a bottle?
It's
maybe?
like $1,300 on it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's insane. It's insanely expensive. And they brought back good fur if you can ever get a bottle of that, and I think it started at 700. It's tough.
They've got a cognac I've had my eye on too, but if I'm, no offense to Kriegler, but if I'm spending a G, I'm going to give it to Russian Adam, not not Kriegler, you know.
Right. Yeah. It's a anyway, that's that would not surprise me because I'm positive they do. They're such an exclusive kind of they only are in a couple of small retail, like one of them is like the Plaza Hotel in New York, I think, and just these little tiny specialty boutiques and whatnot, so they can afford to make bespokes like that, I'm sure. Oh, thanks, Rich.
It is.
A little interesting note about the name Burvuvu, by the way. Oh, and Rachel, thank you for that question, by the way. That was great. Burvuvu was an attempt at like an onomatopoeia chord where I was in my garden and I actually grow some scented geraniums, and I love the fuzziness on geranium leaves, and I thought Burvuvu reflected what it feels like to hold a geranium leaf between your fingers, that fuzzy, that kind of, that was the closest sound I could think of in a word to a geranium leaf between your fingers. So
wow, that's good stuff. Well, you have been very generous with your time. We're 2 hours and 45 minutes in, so there's a ton of great information here, but
totally
before we close, any final thoughts? We covered a ton of ground, so I think this will be a great reference video for people that want to get to know you in the house and get to know kind of your process a little bit.
No, I really appreciate all these questions. I had a question for you. And you can answer if you want. Absolutely fascinated by your pinky ring. Could you tell me something about your ring?
It was my uncle's. Actually,
very cool ring, man.
He gave it to me. It's really the only thing I have left since he passed away. He was a Vietnam vet, and he had just about every affliction that you can imagine from being in Vietnam. He had the Agent Orange exposure and all that stuff, and so he was a great guy. He was in upstate New York, but I'm wearing it as kind of a token, kind of to him.
Nice. It's also a very cool ring on top of that. So. But no, and actually I have a pinky ring as well, and I wore mine in solidarity with you tonight.
In solidarity, that's it. That's good stuff. Well, I can't thank you enough. Honestly, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
we could probably talk for another 3 hours, but
it's been great.
I'll let you go grab some dinner. I'm sure it's late there. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Before you leave, do like the stream. You can check out JanuaryScentProject.com. And I would urge you to get the sample set if you're interested. It's only $40 or something, so it's a good value. And I've really enjoyed getting to know your work. Thank you for being here, John. Thanks to everyone in the chat, and we'll hopefully talk soon. We'll get together on those samples I promised you.
Awesome. I love it. Take care.
Cheers, guys. Good night.
Bye.